In this video you will dive into basics of Angular, and this video is a part of the full course Angular and NgRx building real project from scratch, where we start from the empty folder and finish with the fully functional application. And you can find the link to the full course in the description box below, but if you just want to start with the basics, let's jump right into it. Welcome to my course Angular and NgRx building real projects from scratch. And in this course we will use these two technologies to create a real-world project. We will start with the empty folder and finish with fully functional application. We will create most typical features of every project, like for example authentication, pagination, fetching data from API, liking or disliking articles, working with forms, with TypeScript and much more. We will use Angular together with NgRx, which is the most popular solution to build a scalable application and manage state on the frontend. Of course, all our code will be dry, reusable and easy to understand, and we will cover everything with TypeScript typings. By the end of this course, you will for sure be able to use Angular and NgRx for your own projects of any complexity. Who am I? My name is Ekaterina and I am a web developer with more than 10 years of experience, as well as a professional instructor with various courses regarding web technologies. I did my best to put all my knowledge inside this course, and I want to share it with you. So welcome on board and let's get started. In this video, I want to talk about things that we need to install in order to start developing our project. First thing that you need to install on your machine is Node.js. Maybe you already have it, and to check if you have it or not, you can just write in the console node-version, and as you can see I have node version 12, and also we can check with npm, I have npm version 6. It actually doesn't matter what node version do you have, if it is for example greater than at least 10. So basically we need a node version where we can start running Angular and Angular CLI. And Angular CLI is a tool to start generating new project and to run some Angular commands. And basically here, this is official website cli.angular.io, and here I can click on GitHub, and if you will open this link, this is the GitHub link for Angular CLI, and here in the description you can see we have an installation, and here says that make sure that you have at least Node 10 or later. So basically you can just check this page and know what version do you need to run Angular. So if you don't have Node.js on your machine, just simply jump to nodejs.org and download version. I prefer to use always LTC version, which means long-term support, because it's more stable than current and it is still supported, for example, by Angular, and this is the only thing that we need for now. So after your node is installed and you can see the version of the node in the console, you need to install Angular CLI. So basically here you can check how to install Angular CLI on your machine. You can basically copy here npm install -g, which means global, and if I will run this command, it will install this package globally. After this, I can check if I have Angular or not, if I will just write ng and then -- version. So basically, as you can see, I already have installed Angular CLI, because here you can see the output after the command ng -- version. So here it says that I have version Angular CLI 8 and I have Node 12 and so on, and I have some Angular packages which are already installed. Which basically mean if you run this command and you get something like this after running ng -- version, this means that you are on the safe side and you successfully installed Angular CLI. Now it is time to generate new project. I will name my project Medium Clone because this is exactly what we are going to do. This is the clone of the medium.com, which will have like post, pagination, authentication, likes, dislikes, following users, comments, and so on. So basically here you can see the next command to generate a new project is ng-new and the name. So basically here I can simply copy paste ng-new and then the name will be, for example, medium clone and then dash Angular. After running this command, as you can see, Angular asks us several questions. And the first question is, do we need Angular routing or not? And of course we do, because we want to create routes and to switch between pages. So basically here we are answering yes, and then which style sheet format do we want to use? I prefer to use SCSS because basically we need at least nested rules sometimes, and some things like variables from SCSS is also quite sufficient. So I am using SCSS, and now Angular will install all packages and prepare the empty project. After Angular generated a project for us, we can just go to this directory, medium clone Angular, and start the project. And the command to start a web server for Angular is ngserve. So basically here we just started. The first run can take quite some time, but now it's compiled successfully, and as you can see we can open it on localhost 4200. So basically here it is, localhost 4000, and as you can see this is the default page which was generated by Angular. So here is medium clone Angular is running, and here are some resources and next steps. Which means if you see this page, everything was installed correctly and you are good to go. So let's clean a little bit now the code so we don't have this generated stuff because we don't need it in any case. So here is the project. This is medium clone Angular, and this is everything what Angular generated for us. And basically we want to change everything in source folder and in the app. So here you can see index.html. This is not interested for us for now, and in app folder we have app component HTML, CSS, spec, and app component TS. Basically this is the first component which is rendered here, and we want to empty it. So basically if we open here HTML, you can see that here there are some comments that this content is a placeholder and it can be replaced. Here you can see some inline CSS, and after this at the end we have router outlet where our router is rendered. Basically, let's just delete everything in this file and just write something like hello Angular, because we don't need any other code. And basically if we look in browser, everything is already removed. And now we also want to remove this spec file because we won't write tests. And also in app component SCSS, this is already empty. And now we need to clean app component.ts. It is actually really clean, and the only thing that is here is title property, which we don't need. So basically we can remove it, and now we have simply the empty component. Now our project is completely clean and we can start developing. In this video, I want to talk about tools that we will use with Angular additionally. And we have a lot of stuff in Angular for us, like components, services, dependency injections, also routing and scoped styles and so on. But basically what is not in Angular is managing a state. Basically we need to store somehow the data in frontend and structure them and use them in some way, and Angular does not have something like this. Basically the only thing that Angular has is services and components. And basically if we open just documentation with HTTP, and basically the most often we are working with HTTP, so we fetch some data from some API and we render them. And as you can see here, this is the basic example of working in Angular. So here we have some service like app config and config service. And here is some config URL. And this is just API URL where we fetch our data. And we have some getConfig method where we have this HTTP GET and then the URL. So basically this is just GET request for some data. And the point is that we can only get the data through this service in our component. So basically we have a component like app config component, and inside we have a method, something like showConfig. And basically here we just set some data inside our component through this config service and subscribe, which basically means the only thing how we can fetch data and save them are services. And this is really low level where we just have services, that we just throw some data in services, or we just get the data through the services in components. And this is of course not enough for us if we want to build big and scalable applications where all code is looking in the same way and is easily supported. The most common solution to this problem is to use Redux. And maybe you already know about Redux if you worked, for example, with React, because there it's the most popular. And basically Redux is just a predictable state container for all JS applications. Basically, it doesn't have anything to do with React or Angular or some other framework. This is just a way, like a high-level way, to structure applications and to say how our data will change our state. Basically, why do we need it? We want our components to not know anything about like services or getting data and so on. We want components to communicate with our state containers and then to subscribe to some changes in this state. So Redux is just a library, and we won't use exactly it, but an Angular wrapper for this library, and it is called NgRx. So basically this is exactly the implementation of Redux in Angular, which means we can just install it here. There is an official website, ngrx.io, and here is an introduction, which basically NgRx is a framework. Actually, it's just a library which wraps Redux to make it work with Angular. And here we will use it for state management. It is type safe because it has TypeScript inside. It is easily testable, and here we will install it and use it. So this is basically the only huge dependency which we will use except Angular, and with NgRx we will write like 90% of our code. So basically, of course, we will use like routing from Angular and components, but basically all business logic and all structure of our application will be with NgRx. This is really the scalable and good solution which a lot of people are using in a huge application, which means all people are writing code in the same way, and this code is easily maintainable and supportable. But of course, it's not a silver bullet. And as you remember, in Angular, you will write a lot of code just because it's Angular. So basically, in comparison to, for example, React, you need to write a lot more because you use TypeScript and you need to describe all typings. Then you need to describe your dependency injection between modules. And with NgRx, you will write much more boilerplate, which means you also need to describe everything with your business logic with NgRx. And yes, we will write a lot, but this code will be easily maintainable and easily understandable. So basically, Angular, it's not about writing less code, it's about writing understandable code, and maybe sometimes quite a lot, like more in Java way. In this video, I want to roughly talk about our project structure. Maybe you already saw a lot of applications with Angular in internet, and basically all of them or most of them are written in a very simple way. So basically a lot of applications are simple, like to-do list or some small blog with several pages and so on. And of course we don't want to build something like this. I want to show you the structure that is scalable, which means it won't work only with like 5 pages, for example, like authentication, a single page, then the list and so on, but it will scale to work with the team. So basically you can make with this structure small applications, like maybe 10 or 15 modules, and then scale it to 100 or even 1000 modules. And it will be easy because with our structure we will plan where we need to put what. So basically Angular as a framework doesn't give us any structure, and they just say you can just structure your application whatever you want. And the problem is, of course, that all people are structuring their applications differently, which means you just come in a team and you get a new project and you can't say how the structure will look like at all. Because basically you can put modules and modules in modules, or you can just group all components inside one module and so on. And also you can share services or not share. And we want to have a structure which will be easily maintainable and easily adjustable. So let's check roughly what it will look like and why it is so. So basically, inside our Angular app, we are starting inside source and app folder. And inside we have our app module. And also near we have our app component, which is our root component. And inside this component we start to render all our other components with routing and so on. I prefer to create a module for each page, which means I just create a module, for example, for article page, and I put it directly inside app. I don't create some additional folder like pages or maybe folder modules, because this will just give us additional step to go through the folder which we don't need. So basically we have several pages, like for example 10 of them, and then this means that we just create 10 folders inside our app folder, and we just simply name them as the page, for example like article or authentication or global feed and so on. Now the question is, what do we have inside single module? Let's talk for example about article module. So basically we know, okay, article module means that we have article page, which means a single article which we render there. And of course every module is starting with article.module.ts. And this is another important moment. As you can see from the naming, we have really strict naming. And Angular doesn't say anything about naming of all files, and especially like entities, for example, which are not specified in Angular. And we want to name everything really strictly so we can know how we need to name things and how we need to create new things. So basically, if we have a module, we just name it as a name of the folder, for example, article, and then .module.ts. Then inside our article, we have a components folder. And basically there we will throw all components which we need to render on this page. For example, let's say we need to render an article, which is obviously our root component for article page. Then we put new folder article inside our components, and the naming of the files will be article.component.ts, component SCSS for styling, and of course HTML. Just this is important to understand that all naming with all entities is going in the name, which means, for example, if we create service, then it will be the name of the service, then .service.ts. And with such naming, we can easily understand what this file is doing at all. So we created a bunch of components, for example, article and comments inside our article module. Then we want to fetch some data or do some business logic, and for this we need services. Normally, 99% of the code inside our services is just API calls, which means we name our services normally starting with the name of the module, which means in this case our name will be article.service.ts. This doesn't of course mean that we need to always name things like this. Basically, if our module is really big, then of course we have like several big services with difficult logic inside. But if our module is not big, one service is enough for us and we just pack everything inside it and we name it with the name of the module. After that, we have a folder which is called store. I won't go deep inside now because I want to talk more about NgRx later, but basically all stuff which is related to managing state and NgRx things will go in this folder, and they will belong exactly to this module. The last thing that we have inside module is types. Inside types folder, we store all interfaces or types which we are using only inside this module. For example, if we store article interface and we use it only inside this module, it makes sense to store it inside this folder types. Basically, all our modules for pages will look exactly like we discussed inside article. Now let's talk what we should do if we have some shareable stuff. Normally we have at least some components which are shareable. For example, some follow button which we can use in several pages is shareable. So this means that we can't just put it inside one page because we need to split it between two pages, for example, article and global feed. For this, we create inside app folder a special folder which is called shared, and all shared stuff we will store there. Basically, the main shared stuff are modules. And as you know, in Angular, you can't just store components without modules. Basically, components are just part of the modules and you need to declare them somewhere. Which means either you create some magic shared module where you just throw inside everything that you have, and this is really bad approach because then it's not really shareable but some huge God module where you have all components. Basically, exactly for this, we create inside shared modules our module. For example, let's say we have a module feed where we have the list of items which we're rendering, like for example the articles that we created, and this feed we want to share between different pages. This is exactly the case. Inside shared modules, we create new folder which is called feed, and this is feed module which we want to share everywhere. It can have different things inside. For example, the most basic thing is of course components, and we make inside this module the same structure like for example inside pages. Basically we have also inside components, services, store, types, and of course the name of the module to register this module. At the beginning we have, for example, for feed only component, which means we just render some plain stuff and we reuse this component through the module everywhere. But then of course later we can make this module smart and add services inside with logic with NgRx and some types if we need to. The last thing what we want to share is services and types. Basically, services should not be exactly injected in some shareable module. We can just say, okay, we have shareable services. For example, we have some article service which we use between several modules. For example, article module need an article service and exactly the same methods we need in our global feed. For this, we can throw this service inside shared services, and then we simply register in two places, like for example in article module and in global feed module, this service. So basically these services are just lying there, but they are unregistered. And of course at the end we have types, which means if we have shareable types or interfaces between several modules, we just throw them inside shared types. This is my scalable version of file structure for Angular applications. It works really well with the small projects, and I already checked it with the teams like 10 or 15 people, where the structure shines also really well because you can scale it almost indefinitely. In this video, I want to talk about Prettier. And of course, you can write JavaScript or TypeScript code or CSS, for example, without Prettier, but basically I can't imagine writing fast and efficient code without it at all. And basically I am using it for everyday life almost every time. So basically, what is Prettier? It's optionated code formatter, which means this tool just formats code, nothing more. Why it is so popular and why do you need to use it? Basically, before Prettier, for example, people formatted code with linting tools like ESLint, for example, but the problem was always that different people have different opinions. And the point of Prettier is that you almost can't configure it, which means you can't say, okay, I want brackets to look like this and to be formatted in this way, which means all code in all project is looking exactly the same. Which means, for example, you're working alone or in the team of 5 or 10 people, and you don't need even to speak about code formatting. You speak about code itself, but not about indentation or some rules which just should work out of the box. Let's check how it is look like on the example. So here I am in our folder source app, and here I'm, for example, in app component TS. And here everything is formatted somehow, and for example I'm just giving some incorrect indentation in my file, and then I'm just saving it. As you can see, everything jumped exactly in the place where it should be. So indentation inside our object is correct, and let's say that, for example, here I put also not correct indentation, some strange spaces, or for example here inside brackets I just put some empty space and some indentation here. So basically this file is looking completely broken. Then we just save, and as you can see here it was fixed, but here it is not, because this is invalid code, and basically invalid code Prettier can't fix, which means if the code is valid it will be intended. And it's not working only here in TypeScript, but basically in almost all popular web languages. So here on the main website you can see that Prettier works with a lot of different things. For us it's important that we can work with TypeScript, of course JavaScript, CSS, SCSS, HTML, Angular markup, and so on. There are also other community plugins, for example for PHP or Elm or other languages like Ruby. Basically, you can use Prettier from console, but it doesn't make that much sense. What we want to do is we want to implement Prettier in editor, so when we just save files, they will be correctly formatted, which means we don't need to think about indentation and everything will be working out of the box. So here is usage, and in this link you can check how you can install it in your editor. So here you can read about it if you want, and here is configuring Prettier and editors. The first thing is of course editor integration. You can just click here and check your editor. Let's say you are using, for example, Visual Studio Code, which is really popular editor, and here you can simply install an extension Prettier VS Code, and you just search for it, you install it, and then it should work out of the box. So basically here is repository for this package, and here you can see some default formattings and some issues that you have, and you can simply fix them by checking this repo. The next thing, when you successfully installed Prettier to your editor, is to write a config. You basically almost can't configure Prettier, but there are several rules that you can configure. And here you can see options inside configure Prettier and configuration file. So basically here are options. There are not that much of them, like only 4. And here is configuration file. So basically we want to create in our application in Angular in root file .prettier.rc and then write there our configuration. And here you can see basic configuration. And let's just create inside our project new file and name it .prettier.rc and then open this file and I will just paste inside my configuration. So basically it's really small. So here I am saying, okay, I want indentation of 2 symbols and I like single quotes everywhere and not double quotes. My maximum width of lines should be 80 symbols. Then my code is really good intended. And bracket spacing is false, which means when you have something like import and you have some destructuring foo, you don't have here spaces. For me this looks not really nice, that's why I always set bracket spacing to false. And semicolon false is really tricky option. Some people like it, some people don't. I really don't use semicolons in JavaScript and TypeScript at all in a lot of projects, a lot of years, and everything is working fine. There are only 3 cases in JavaScript when your code won't transpile when you are not using semicolons. And basically in normal projects, normal people never write these cases. Which means semicolons, if you have them to false, you have something like const foo equals 2, and this semicolon will be deleted by Prettier on save. Which means I don't have in my code semicolons at all. Basically, let's save this configuration and restart an editor and check how it will look like. So here we are in source app and let's open the same app component TS as previously, but now our correct Prettier configuration is loaded and let's just save the file. So basically, as you can see, the only difference is that we have here indentation with spaces inside square brackets, and we also have here double quotes, and after save it's single quotes, which means our configuration is working correctly, and we don't have also any indentation. So basically here, if we try to create a variable foo and say 1, and then we put here semicolon, and then we save, it just goes away, which means Prettier is working correctly, and we are good to go. In this video, I want to talk about Language Server Protocol. Basically, this is the tool that allows you to get such features like, for example, autocomplete, auto-imports, and so on for different languages. Basically, it's really difficult to implement such things like, for example, go to definition or documentation on hover and so on, just directly in the editor. This is why in Microsoft they created Language Server Protocol, and basically the idea you can read on the official website, like on Microsoft GitHub IO, Language Server Protocol. Here it is written that the idea is that you have like a server which is completely agnostic to your editor, which means this is just some protocol, and between your server, like for example TypeScript server, and your editor there is a bindings, so basically some events where you give some information to this language server and get some information back. In this case, you get such things like go to definition, auto imports, auto completes out of the box. And I can imagine developing applications in JavaScript without language servers, but not in TypeScript. The point is that you always want to check what type you have, what interface do you have, what do you import, and basically in Angular with TypeScript we are writing quite a lot of code, which means we want auto imports to resolve everything faster and to get auto imports faster than we will type by ourselves. So let's check how it looks like when we're using it. For example, let's say that I'm now in app component and I just deleted one symbol here. And here I have TS server, and basically this is exactly language server, which just runs near the IDE and says me what is wrong. Basically, it tries to transpile code with TypeScript, and the results of this transpiling I'm getting back in my editor. In this case, I'm getting like cannot find name component because it's not written correctly. And here we're importing component, but here the name is not correct. Basically, this is like errors from the compiler directly in your editor. And it's not only this. For example, let's assume that we don't have import and we just wrote, okay, add component, and basically TypeScript is saying cannot find name component. And now I can just click on the key bind and you can see that we get directly import on the top, which basically means I save a lot of time because I don't need to check, okay, from where do I need to import now component from Angular or Angular core or whatever. I just click like import and then I get this import on the top. Of course, it's not always 100% correct, but it works really good in 90%. And we want to save a lot of time to get these imports, because when you have like in one file maybe 50 or 100 imports, writing them and managing them by hand, it's really time consuming, and we want to avoid this. For example, I don't know what editor are you using now, but I would say, for example, for the most popular editor, this is Visual Studio Code. The support of the TypeScript with this language server is directly inside, so you don't need to install anything. You just write code, and you have these things like autocomplete. You see here the special window where when you import some methods or just with dot write them, you see what parameters you need to throw inside, and so on and so on. Basically, almost for every popular editor, you can find language servers, and sometimes you need to configure something, sometimes not. But basically, I would highly recommend you, if you want to avoid like typing all code by yourself, and to use these language servers to avoid errors and to get on the fly these messages and ability to import things. In this video, we will start with implementing register module. Basically, here you can see that I opened a website called angular.realworld.io, and this is the example of application. This is not the application that we will build from the code perspective, but this is the Angular application, and basically you can click here, like check pages, what we want to implement, and so on. So basically here in this lesson, for us is interesting the sign up page. You can jump here on the top in top bar, and now we are on register page, and we will use the same fonts and CSS like this project is using. So basically the idea of real world example is to implement the same application in different languages or in different frameworks. So here we can open a network, for example, and check the requests that we are doing. Let's say here we want to know what requests are happening when we are registering. So we're clicking on sign up, and then here we fill something in all fields. And now we click sign up, and we know that this is the request for URL conduit production ready IO, and this is the public API that we will use. So basically we won't create our own backend, but we will use this public API, and we know that we can register new users here when in /API/users we are posting the data like this. So basically it's a user object with email, password, and username. And as a response, we're getting some errors, for example, if the data are not correct. For example, in this case, the password is too short. That's why we can't register user. So basically, we won't write any CSS because we will reuse it because it's public, and we won't write any fonts because they are also public, and we will use this public API to make all requests. So basically, the whole focus on the course will be only on Angular code on front-end side. Now let's start coding. So basically we know, okay, this is the sign up. So this is the register page, and this is the first page that we will implement. So as we discussed in file structure, let's check the code. So basically we are in source app, and here is our app module and app component and routing. So here we will just create the pages, just like folders, and then we will also additionally add shared later if we have some shared stuff. So let's start here. I would prefer to group these two components. So basically this is the component register, and near you can see the component login. So these two components are really similar. They are about authentication. So I prefer to create then one folder. We can call it Auth. And basically here we will put all our routes, so pages about authentication. In our case, it will be register and login. And we will start here with creating a new file, and we can name it auth.module.ts. So as I already said in file structure, we always name our modules the same like a folder, which means our folder is auth, we're creating auth module, and the name is with small letters auth module ts, and never the name will be different. In this case, we can really structure our application in the same way everywhere, and people will know how we're writing the code. Now let's check that we want to create a module. And in Angular, to create a module, we just export class and the name will be auth module. So basically the class names are with big letter. And now we need to provide ng module here, and as you can see I am getting autocomplete while I am typing, and when I will hover on one of the elements I am getting this nice window where I see what I get. So in this case I see, okay, this is ng module, this is Angular module, which is the decorator, and I see from where I will import this module or function. In this case, when I click enter, you can see that I get auto import ng module from Angular core, which is completely fine, and this is exactly language server. About it I was talking in previous video. So basically here we have an ng module with empty object, and we provide something inside. By default we always provide only imports, and here need to go common module. This is standard module of Angular, and we always provide it for every module. And as you can see also, you could see here the jumping, because here the indentation was not how Prettier wanted it, and when I click save, then everything is indented correctly. I don't have spaces here, and here the code looks much better. So our auth module is created. This is like the super raw basic version of the module, and we need to create new components inside this module. So as we discussed previously, we create our components inside Auth in components folder. And now inside these components we can pack as many components as we want, but we always put them in additional folder, which means here just in components we don't have files, we have only folders. And in our case the first page that we create will be register, so we create here the folder register. And now, of course, with the same naming as we discussed, we name it register.component.ts, register.component.html, and for CSS, register.component.scss. Actually, for this project, we won't write any CSS because it is already prepared and we will just use it. But I will always create these files in this way just for the sake of simplicity. Because at the moment when you need to add styles, it's much easier to see the same structure everywhere and you just know, okay, my every component has styles and I can just roll them inside. So everything is already prepared. Now let's create a basic component for register page. Basically, this is our page, register, and we want to just create simple layout here. And all components in Angular we are registering with special component decorator. So basically, just to remind you, modules we register with ngModule decorator and components with component decorator. So here we have also class register component. And just to say once again, our file name is register.component and classes we always name camel case, but we never say just class register, because in this case it's not clear for us what entity it is. If we're writing register component, it's clear for everybody that this is component. So it's just empty, and we want here to import component decorator. And as you can see, I have auto import and here is the object. And inside we want to give a selector, and this will be the tag with which we will use this component. And basically we also want to do this strictly. And the guideline of Angular says that in the application we need to prefix everything, all tags in our application the same. Basically, in our case, we can prefix it with MC, which means medium clone. In this way, we know that these tags belong to this application. Why it is good? Just imagine we're in HTML and we have in HTML something like MC top bar. And we know that this tag comes from our application, and we also installed like 5 different libraries with different components inside, and then we import some library with name top bar, and at least we can understand here that this tag comes from us and these tags come from somewhere else. If we name our tags also top bar, then we can't distinguish between libraries and our code. That's why I always recommend to prefix all our selectors with some prefix of the project. You can just check what prefix do you want. I think MC is nice prefix and it's not a lot to write. So in our case, this is MC register because the name is register component. Also, we need to write here template URL, and this is the path for the template. And also, of course, style URLs. And style URLs is our CSS, and it will be register component as CSS. Now our component is ready, but when I hover, you can see the message that component is not included in module and won't be available. And this is of course true because we didn't inject this component inside our module. So we need to jump back to our Auth module, and here we need to register it. So basically how we register modules, we just have a declarations property here, and we throw all components inside. In our case, it will be register component, and as you can see, TypeScript and my Angular language server already understands that we created a new component, and we can just auto import it. And I just click enter, and you can see that the whole path is here. Basically, this is one more thing about Angular itself. We just installed Angular project, and Angular created a lot of files for us. For example, the config for TypeScript. And in this config, it is said that we can just write absolute path. So of course, path can't start with source. And basically through the TypeScript config, Angular says, okay, we treat source folder as our root folder, which means we can import everything starting from source. For example, in our case, it's source, then app, then auth, then components, register, and this component. So we're here in module. This is our path. Of course, we write it without .ts at the end, but we want to import everything when it is possible with absolute path and not related. Of course, we could write here something like this. So basically, we just remove this part, and we're saying, okay, this is relative path inside our component. This will work, but I highly recommend you not to do it. Because at some point you want to just copy this line and put it in another place. And if you have relative path, it won't work. And you just need to adjust all places by yourself in every file. And this is of course time consuming. We don't want this. The second point is at the moment when you just change the place of this file, you can simply copy this file, this absolute path. You know that this absolute path is everywhere the same, and then we just simply want to find this path and change it in all places at once. If we have a relative path for this file, then we can't do it because it's not everywhere the same. So absolute path for the win. Here we declared our component for our module, which means our component is ready. And now let's write something in our register page. For example, register component. Now our HTML is ready. Our file with component is also ready. And our module we also created. Now we need somehow to go here and jump to /register to see our component. And here, of course, is one more important thing to remember. We, of course, could here go to source app, and here we have app routing, and basically here we write all routes for our application. So you can see, okay, we have app routing, and we are using this app routing inside app module. So here we import app routing and then use it. Which means Angular says, okay, just write here all your routes and everything will work. But this approach is not good. Why it's not good? Because if we write here some routes, let's say that we say here, okay, we have path register, which is path that we want, and then we want here component, and here will be register component. This is fine, it will work. We can even check that it is working. Actually not yet, because we forget to inject our register module inside app module. So basically everything is starting with app module here, and app module doesn't know anything about our auth module. So we need to register this auth module. And for this, in imports, we can simply say here auth module, and we just click, and here is our import, and this means we registered auth module inside our app module. So here there are no errors inside our web server, and when we reload the page everything seems to work. Then we try to jump to register, and you can see here nothing. And this is the error here because we didn't put route tag inside. Basically here you can see in app component HTML we have here hello Angular. So basically we have not a single word about routing. Here we need to add special code which will trigger routing, which means there is a tag from router. Inside this tag router will work. So all information will be rendered inside this tag. And this tag is called router outlet. So basically here is router outlet, and we close router outlet. And now we reload the page. And as you can see here, here is hello Angular, and here we can see a register component. So everything is working. Let's just wrap this code in some h1. So here is hello Angular, and then our register component. Our module works, but there is a problem. Here, inside app routing, we says that we have a route register component. Now, just imagine that we develop application, and then at some point, our product owner is saying to us, we don't need this module anymore, and we need to remove Auth module completely. And we just remove this folder, and it's not there anymore, but we never updated this file, which means we just get some errors about that component is not there because this path obviously doesn't exist anymore and this code won't work. Basically, the idea of modules is to scope things inside this module. This means that we want to put everything regarding Auth module inside Auth module, which means this is not right. We register routes outside of the module. Basically, we need to remove it from here, and we need to remove this import because we don't need it here. So here we don't have any routes. Then we need to go in our app Auth module and register routes. So basically we can do this here, just create routes for this particular module. And we write the same code here. This is just an array with object. And here the path is register and component is our register component. And even we have already this component inside this file, so we even don't need to import it. Now we just need to use these routes that we created inside our ng module. So here to do this, we have in imports special thing from route module. So we can say route module, and as you can see, auto import already imported it. We can say for child, and this is exactly the thing. As you can see in the description, it creates a module with all the router directives and providers registering routes, which means when you want to register some routes for the module, you are using router module.forchild, and inside it, you simply need to throw routes. In our case, we have routes, we just save it, and basically this code says, okay, please register these routes for this module, which means only when we import these modules, this module is imported in app module, then these routes will be applied. And before, we won't have any routes about register. Now let's check if it's working. No errors in the console. We just reload the page, and here we're on home page. We just jump to register, and our code works exactly the same. But now the main difference, we just need to remove this Auth folder, and everything is not there. And routes are also, of course, obviously unregistered because we just removed this folder with this module. So everything is scoped, and we are good to go. In previous video, we created our basic Auth module and register component. Now it's time to add markup to our register component. So here let's jump in register. Basically, I will just write the same markup as we have here inside this angular.realworld.io. So basically, we start from the Auth page and we throw everything inside. So let's go to our HTML, and here we will have div with class Auth page with the dash, and then we close this div. And as you can see on save, Prettier also covers HTML files, so basically we don't need to intend it correctly. And inside Auth page we will have container and class page, and inside container page we will have div with class row, and inside this row it will be column. Basically, as you can see, this is all classes from Bootstrap, so it's nothing new, it's just plain Bootstrap. So here we have call md6 with offset md3 and call xs12. Basically, this means that when we have a small device, for example a mobile, then we will have our column full width. which means basically here we have this sign up form, and this is our column, and on small devices it will take full width, and on medium devices like for example desktop or tablet, it will have only 6 columns from 12, which means half of the screen, and we have here offset to put it on the center. So here we close our column, and inside column we have h1, and inside this h1 we will have text. So here we will have class text XS center, and inside h1 it will be sign up, and we can simply save it now and check how it looks like. And as you can see, it does not look styled at all, but we will fix it after whole markup. So here is h1 tag, and then we have p with class, and here will go text XS center. And inside this p tag, we want to have a link. Basically, as you can see here in an example, after this h1 we have a link, and this link goes to login page. Basically it is asking, do you have an account? And if yes, then we simply need to show the link for the login page. So basically links in Angular we are doing with a href as always, but instead of href we have a special attribute which is called router link. And here we can simply use it, and we can write our routes in 2 ways, like normal, for example /login, and like array. I prefer always to write them like array, just because at the moment when you need to change it, it's easier to convert, because in the array you just simply need to throw new argument inside, and when it is simple string then you need to do more. In this case I am writing here this string as array. So basically here we close a tag, and inside a we have text have an account and question mark. So as you can see we have a href, and href is router link. Basically this is the directive of Angular, and here we have an array, not a string but array, and inside just a string /login. After this we will have our backend error messages. What is this? Here, as you can see, we just throw something inside which is not valid, and we just click sign up, and you can see that here we get some backend errors, and we also want to implement something like this. So basically in this place here we want to render backend errors are here. So for now we don't have this component. We will implement this component later, but to not forget, we just write here that backend errors we will render at this place. After this we start our form, and here is form, and inside our form we have our elements. So basically each element we wrap in field set, and we close field set. And inside first field set we will have the second, and the second field set will have class form group, and this is the class for single input in our case, and we close here field set and write inside an input. So this is input with type text, and then class form control and form control LG to make it big, and then of course placeholder. And placeholder for the first field will be username. Now we close it and save. Prettier prettified it, and after first field set we can just copy paste this field set, because we will have a lot of them. So we have a second field, and this is also text, the same classes, but in this case it will be email, and we can copy this field set once again and paste it underneath, and it will be password. So here type will be not text but password, and in placeholder we will have password. So basically our form is almost ready. after the last field set, we need a button to submit this form. So basically here we open and close button, and in here we will have class, and class will be button, button LG, button primary, and pull XS right, and inside, and also we will have type submit, of course, because this is a form, and inside button we want to have sign up text. Now let's save it. As you can see, unexpected close tag is happening here, which means we forget to do something. And here, as you can see, I forget to put slash in the button. This is why markup is broken. And basically this is the example when TypeScript language server works really well, because like we see just in line some error and we don't need to transpile it to check what is here in the server. Do we have problem or not? We just see it and we directly can fix it. So our form is ready. We can reload the page, and it looks of course really ugly because we don't have any CSS. So now we want to put inside our project some CSS and also fonts and icons. And for this we need to go back in our source. So here I am in source folder, and here you can see index.html. And this is index.html, which is created by Angular, and all Angular app is going here inside app root. So basically here in head we can throw something inside, and here is what I will throw. So first of all, it's a link for CSS, and here this ref is this public CSS what I already mentioned. So here is demo production ready IO main CSS. Basically you can simply use this CSS to build the project which will look exactly like this. Now the second is icons from Ionic framework, and the third is font for logo. Basically we need just these three things, and then everything should work. So we just throw them in head and reload our page. And as you can see already, everything is looking much better, and basically my page is really zoomed a lot, and now I have zoom 100, and this is looking exactly like in this example. So if I here make also 100 zoom, then it is exactly the same form with the same styles. Now we want to bind all these inputs to our form. And we have really nice tool in Angular, which is called reactive forms. If you know about it, this is really good for you. If not, I will talk about it in a second. Basically, we can use from Angular such thing as form groups to write our forms. Basically, we can say, okay, this is my input, and I can bind this input to my form group, and then this input and this input, and then I am saying that these three fields, these three inputs, is my form. Which means my this.form knows if this form is valid, for example, and if I change some values, they are directly changed in this form, which means I can read them at any point, and I can write validators there, or I can, for example, know if my form was changed or not. So basically we need here for this to say, okay, we have new property form in our component, and this is form group. And here I don't get autocomplete for some reason, and we need to write it by hands. So here we import form group from Angular forms. And basically Angular forms is already installed. We can check it. Basically, if we open package.json, which is in root of our folder, here you can see in dependencies we have Angular, common, and for us now is interesting Angular forms. Basically, we create this form, and now we need to add reactive forms in our Auth module. So basically here in imports we have different stuff, and now we need to import one more additional module, and this is reactive forms module. So it comes from Angular forms, and now we are saying, okay, our Auth module needs to have access to reactive forms module from Angular. So now we have this form group and we need to create the form. So basically here first we need to create form builder. And basically what is form builder? It is the thing which helps us to create form groups, and you will see it in a second. To inject something inside our component, we normally write in constructor everything like arguments with word private, and we're saying here that we have new property in this, which is named FB, and this is form builder. And now I have autocomplete, I think because I injected reactive forms in the module. So now I just click here and I have form builder. And now we need ng on init. Just to remind you, on init happens when we initialize our component. So here we're saying implements on init, which means that our component needs to create function ng on init. And here exactly this error, we don't have ng on init function inside our component. So here after constructor, I create ng on init function, and as you can see here, we can simply write it like this, ng on init, but I prefer for all functions always write return value, even if it's not needed, because then it's clear for all people what is it about, and you never make a mistake when you return some value. Now the next point, we can of course simply write some code here like this, foo equals 1. And then we write more, and we have in ng on init a lot of code, which is normally really different. That's why I prefer to make ng on init clean and group things together. For example, here we want to create form. If I'm creating forms, I always name my function initialize form, and just like that. So basically in the whole project or in every project that I'm making, I'm naming it like this. Then I know that it is named like this. It's not this generate form or something like that. This is some stable names. There are like several of them, and I just use them everywhere to make things consistent. So here we have initialize form method, and we calling this method on ng on init. So basically here we can just write console log to check if it's working. Initialize form. We just reload the page and open the console. And here on reload, so we need to jump to register page. You can see we get an error, control container not found. And this is happening because we created this form group, but we didn't register it in HTML. So to fix this, we need in our HTML to add this form that we created to our markup. So basically we have here on the top form, this is form, and basically here you can see already the error of the TypeScript, no provider for control container. So here we're saying that we need form group, and this is exactly what we created inside our TypeScript file, and here we're throwing form inside. So now, once again, this form group element is binded directly to this form in our template. Now we jump back, and if we reload the page, we don't have an error, hopefully. Now we have this. Form group expects a form group instance, and we need to add it. And basically here is an example. So we have some form group element, and we did it, but we never wrote this form control name for every input. And basically we need now to add for every input this property. Then Angular will know that we want to bind these inputs to this form. So basically in this case, in input we simply need to write form control name, and inside we are saying, okay, this is username property. And we can copy this line, and then inside next input it will be form control name email, and in the third input it will be form control name password. Now the only problem is that we created this form, but we never initialized this form. So basically here you can see actually that our initialize form is there because this method is called, and now we need to fill this form property. And to do this, we simply assign this fb.group, and this fb comes from this import. So fb is form builder, and we use form builder here to build a group, and inside we need to pass an object. And basically this object is fields that we need. In our case, username, we can simply pass empty string, email also empty string, and password empty string. Basically here we are setting initial values of our form. Now, as you can see, we can reload the page. Everything is working and we don't have any errors. But we can make better. Basically, this is just reactive forms, and here we can write, instead of just string, an array. And the first element of this array will be initial value, empty string, and then the second can be validator. And we can say here, okay, we need a validator from validators, and this validator is required. And basically we don't need to pass control, so it looks like this. So here we are saying, okay, we have username property inside our form, and the initial value is empty string, and inside we say that this field is required. And we can do the same for other two, and I think it makes sense. So here is email, and the last one is password, and all three are empty by default, and we have these three validators. As you can see in browser, our form is working, we don't have any errors, but it would be really nice to have some submit method where we can get values of our form. So basically it's really easy to add. We have here form with form group, and we need here to add an event. And every form in Angular has an event ng-submit, and here, for example, we can name it onSubmit. And basically this is our event. We need to create it in TypeScript file here on the end, for example. And on submit, it's just void. And we're saying here console log submit. And here we want this form. And actually to get value in this form, as you can see, we have hundreds of properties. And for us is interesting is value. So basically value will give us the value of the form back. So we just reload the page, no errors, and now let's just write something inside. And we click sign up, and as you can see in console, we have here submit, and inside we get an object, which basically means we don't need to do anything by hand, like reading the value from input or having some onChange event in input and so on. We simply need to write here in HTML this form group, then here this form control name, and then we magically get in this form everything that we need. In our case, we just need these properties, and we also know if our form is valid or not. Let's say, for example, we want here to know if the form is valid. So it will be this form is, no, it's just valid. And we just reload the page here, and we click sign up. And as you can see, three properties are empty, and then form is not valid. This is really nice approach to work with forms. It's really flexible, and Angular gives a lot of possibilities to work with forms and configure everything that we need, just out of the box. As you can see, we prepared our layout for register page. In previous video, we already created our sign up form, and on sign up, we get information from our inputs. So basically our form is ready and we already created a layout. Now it's time to install NgRx to start working with state and data. So just to remind you, here is NgRx.io. This is official website, and basically this is a wrapper around Redux for Angular to manage state and simplify working with components and services. So basically, let's say we have a register component and we need to make some HTTP request on submit to just store user in our database and speak with API. So we could, for example, inject here HTTP, something like this, HTTP client, and then client, and then we just say post, and here is some URL foo, and we just put here this form value. And this is of course a subscription, and we just have subscribe, and then here we get some result, and we do something with result, like for example console log or showing the errors and so on. This is like the super basic approach, and of course it's not recommended even in Angular. The idea is that our components then knows too much about logic, so they know something about state, they know how to speak to API, and basically this code is not reusable at all because it is coupled with our register component, and if we need to call this method in other place, we just can't because it's now sticked here. The second approach, of course, which is allowed by Angular, is to use services. So basically, instead of this HTTP and post, we are writing here something like this, and then some service that we created, for example, register service. And this is the service that helps us to work with register. Or for example, we can name it authentication service. So this is Auth service, and inside is method register, where we throw inside this form value. It's actually not bad approach, but in this case this is a little bit low level, because people can write services in different ways, and there is no such thing like a strict guideline in Angular about how to do things. And obviously we want to write things really strictly so that all people must write things in the same way. Then we can easily support the code. So basically here we don't know at all what is inside register, what Auth service is doing, and how some person implemented this service. Also, yes, we can share the method from here, but basically it's not that flexible. That's why we need NgRx, and in this video we will install it. So basically let's look on the examples here. There are different parts of NgRx, and we will start with NgRx store. And this is basically get started. Here you can check the concepts, and basically we can look on this diagram, and at the beginning it can be a little bit complicated, but we will go through it step by step, and later you will understand it. So basically let's check roughly how it is working. So here on the left you can see our component. For example, in our case this is register component. And basically this component can trigger some actions. Basically the action can be, for example, register. So components say, please make register. In this case, component does not know anything, and register is just some function from some place. So component triggered action, and then this action goes in our reducer. And basically we have such thing as store, and this is the whole state of our application, like the huge object where we store all properties that we need for our application. For example, there is a property articles where we store all articles, and property is submitting or is loading, and we can use all properties through the whole application. And exactly to get some parts of this store, like for example one property, for example articles, we're writing selectors. So basically we need selectors to select a part of the store. This is like the first part, and basically we can live with this part, like the left part of this diagram, and then we have the right part. And basically the left part we can use just to make synchronous actions. This means, for example, our component can say, okay, we want to open some bar, or we want to show this div, or we want to do something in frontend. Basically, this part is working only on client side. But at some point, of course, very quickly, we want to talk to API. And to talk to API in NgRx, you have such thing as effects. Basically, the idea is that effects are a bunch of actions that we can run asynchronously. And we will check it later much more deeply. And the idea is that effect can say, for example, we want to fetch an article. Then inside effect, we can write several actions. For example, article fetch start and article fetch success when it successfully happened, and a failure if it's happened with error. And additionally, of course, we have a service, and all our services will be like super dumb. We'll write zero logic in our services, and there will be only methods for talking with API. Basically, each method will be just HTTP GET or POST with some data that we need. That's it. If you don't understand this diagram now, it's not a problem, because we will go through all steps really deeply. So let's check the installation. So let's jump here in installation, and as I prefer to use Yarn, we can install it with Yarn. Basically, it doesn't matter if you will install it with npm or Yarn, and basically the difference you can check on Yarn website. So Yarn is just a package manager, which also uses npm registry, but it is much more stable and a little bit faster. That's why I prefer it. If you don't have it, you can just simply install it with, for example, package manager, or just directly from the website here. You can just click getting started and installation, and here how you can install it on your machine. It's just plain package, and you need to check in CLI if you have a Yarn installed. So on my machine I have Yarn already installed, that's why I get a version. And basically, if you don't have Yarn, you can simply use npm, because it will just install the package in the same way. I will install it with Yarn here in our application, and we just wait for installation, and we can check here the architecture. And basically, architecture is starting with actions. So basically, if you remember the diagram, we dispatched actions from our component. So basically, here is how action is looking like. So here is action is like nothing but just the object with the type string. So basically, it can look like this. So it's an object with type, and this is what we are doing. So basically, action means that we are doing something. For example, we are having here login success. So we dispatch the action login success, and this means for our application that we logged in the user successfully. And you can see here brackets. Basically, we use this notation. This is just a string, so this is nothing more. But this notation is shown to understand which module this action belongs. In this case, we are saying, okay, we dispatch this action, and this action is described inside authentication module. In this case, we can easily understand which actions goes where and find from where they were called. So here, as you can see, we can also give inside action some params, for example, like username or password, and here is the action with login. So let's now get to the code, and you will see how it looks like. So here is the basic example how to write an action. Basically, an action is just a function, and we are calling special helper create action to create it, and we pass here the type. This is exactly what you saw on the top, and then props, for example, username and password. So basically, props is additional data. So let's see, here I already installed this package, NgRx store, so we can use it. And to start using it, let's create several files. So I'm here now in app Auth, so Auth module, and as we said, everything about NgRx will go to the new folder, which is called store. Basically, it will be like this in every module. And the first thing that I want to install is to create these types. Basically, as you can see here in documentation, they just throw strings inside action. But I find that it's not that comfortable, because for me it's easier when these action types, these strings are unique and I see all action types that I have for my module. That's why in Auth store I want to create new file and call it action types.ts. And this type will be just an enum, so I will export it. So this is export enum and it is called action types. And inside it we can write several enums. For example, we can say that we have action login. But in our case we are on register page, so we need for sure an action register. And as you remember, in enums we can just write like this, so register, and here will be our string. And as we said, we want in square brackets to write the name of the module. So it will be auth, and here will be text register. So basically this is an enum, and I know that some people prefer to just create action types like const. So here export const action types, and then this is just the object, and it looks like this. What's the difference and why enum is better? So when you create a lot of action types, you basically normally copy paste them. And then you just rename some parts of it, like for example, this is register success and this is register failure. But at some point you just forget to rename it. And then you can't have the same name, and enum says for us that all properties need to be unique. So in this case, if we will rename this to enum like this and just remove commas here and save, and I don't need here equal sign, duplicate identifier register. As you can see, I directly have an error that duplicate identifier is not possible. That's why enum is better, because enum says that all properties of enum should be unique. In this case, we directly see, okay, we have a problem and we have a duplicate. And then we will rename it to register failure, for example, and then save, and it should work. And it's not working. I think because we need commas in enum. Yes, now I save it, and as you can see, you can always understand if your code working or not, because if it is correct code, Prettier will format it. So basically, if I save and Prettier fixes my code and indentation, this means this code is correct. So basically, we will later need another action types, so let's just leave here these three action types and just say this is register success, and this will be action types when we will successfully register a user, and we have failure when we can't successfully register a user, and we have some failures. So basically this code doesn't have anything to do with NgRx, this is just a plain enum from TypeScript. The next point is to create an action. So basically here we can create a new file and we can call it actions.ts, and then we will create something like this. So basically we need to create new function, and this will be register because we want to register user. This is our action, and here we are saying create action, and basically I don't have autocomplete for some reason, so we can just copy paste this code from the example and just save it. So create action from NgRx store, and we also have props, but basically yes, we need a props because we need to give inside some information. And as you remember here in component, we can see that we are given username, email and password. And just for now, let's create it like three plain variables. So username, password, and it will be email. And email should also be string. So basically this is specification of properties that we need to give inside login. Now the question is how we can dispatch this action in our component. And of course there is also an example in documentation. For example, we are in login page component and this is on submit, and we can write store dispatch, and dispatch is the method to dispatch actions, and then login is the action that we created here, and we give an object inside. So basically props is always an object, and in this case with username and password. So let's do something like this. We jump to our component, and here we need store. So basically, to have store, we will write here private store, and this comes from store. So here, as you can see, I imported from NgRx store. So we have access to a store here, and now after console log, we can write this store, and here will be dispatch, and here I need to give an action, and our action will be register, and inside register we need to give an object, and this object actually will be this form value. As you can see, we have an error that register is not found. So let's check. We have an action login, and it's not correct, and we wrote here incorrect string because we copy pasted it from docu. Basically, we want here to have our action types. So basically here I will write action types, and they have auto import and dot register. This is what we want to call, and our action will be called register. As you can see, they also name things in documentation just like this. So login, or for example register. I prefer to always name things strictly, and in this case we know that this is action. That's why we name it not register but register action. I recommend this approach to understand what types of data we have. For example, then we can understand, okay, this is interface, this is action, and this is component. So this is now clear. We have register action, and let's jump back in the component, and here we have register action. And as you can see, I even see in TypeScript what is it about. So basically we have inside props with username, password, and string and email string. And when we just hit enter, here we have a register action, and on the top it was auto imported from store actions, and this is exactly correct. And one more small thing, I always try to separate imports which are coming from libraries, for example NgRx or Angular, from my own imports. In this case it's easier to check and see what we imported where. So once again, here this store dispatch, we're dispatching something, and for this we're using store from NgRx, and we're saying that we are dispatching action, register action, and we're giving inside this value. Let's try to give here some bad value, for example just a string, and we directly have an error that string is not assignable to a parameter of object username, password, and email. We already wrote almost all code that we need from NgRx, like a basic example, but we didn't import the module from NgRx itself. And here in docu, you can see that inside our app module, we need a store module. So this line here, this is store module. This is a module from NgRx. Here is store module from NgRx store. And here we just need to write for root and register it. Basically, we can just copy this line or write it ourselves. So we jump to app module ts. And here at the end of our imports, we can write store module. And we need to write for root. And inside we can just write it with empty array. For now we won't pass anything inside. So as you can see, import store module, and as I already mentioned, I want to always write my library imports on the top and my own on the bottom. So basically here at the end in the imports we have store module for root, and this is to register NgRx store in our app module. Now let's jump in our application, and as you can see we don't have any errors at all. And now let's jump back to our component, and we already have here this store dispatch, so when we go here to register, it should work without any errors. So let's write here something and just click sign up. And as you can see, we don't have any errors, but we don't see anything happening. That's why we need to install some tool which will show us what actions are triggered and help us to debug this code really efficient. In the previous video, we already created an action and dispatched it in our component, but we can't see the results of our work, and it's of course frustrating. So that's why in this video we will install such thing as store devtools to see all our actions and our state and to work with it. So basically store devtools is a special module which we can install, and additionally we need to install, for example, in Google Chrome extension to see in this extension everything regarding our reducers, store and actions. So basically here, as you can see in installation, there is an NgRx store devtools. You can just copy it and install in the console. So yarn add NgRx store devtools, or you can use npm also. Basically it is installed and there are some steps to configure it. So basically here we can jump in overview and there is a setup. So first of all, you need to download Redux Chrome extension. You can jump here and then it will be opened in GitHub, and there is a link for Chrome, Firefox and for Electron. Basically I'm using Chrome and you can simply install it from Chrome Web Store. I already installed that extension, so I don't need to do this step. And the second step is to add store devtools module .instrument. And as you can see here in the example, we're in app module, and we already did this first line with store module for root, and the next line will be store devtools instrument. This is to register devtools. And inside we're given two properties, max age 25, which means that we see only 25 last states. We're using this option to make devtools more performant, because normally we don't need to store a lot of old states inside. And log only environment production, this means that it will work in log only mode in production, which is fine, and we can simply do the same in our app module. So let's jump to app module. Here we have store module for root, and the next thing will be store devtools, and my autocomplete don't get it, so I will just copy it here. So this is, oops, it should be like this. So here is store devtools, and I just copy the import from the top. So it is import store devtools module from store devtools, and here just on new line we import it. And here we have store devtools module, and here is instrument and max age. We just remove comments because we don't need them, and here we remove comment also. As you can see here, in example they used environment production, and we have this variable already. Here you can see if we jump in root, inside source we have a folder which is called environments. And inside environments, we have environment for dev, this is environment TS, and environment for production, environment prod TS. Basically, if we will open this file, we see a lot of comments, but here there is a property production false, and exactly this property is used here. So basically all what we need is just do auto import, for example, or write it by hand. Here I have import environment from source environments environment. And basically environment, this is, as you can see, an object, and there is a property production which says if we are in production mode or not. So basically these three lines are everything that you need to do regarding installing of devtools. And of course, don't forget, you need to install an extension. Now let's check. As you can see, I don't have any errors here in my web server. So let's jump in our project and reload the page. No errors in the console, and here there is a Redux tab. This Redux tab is here from this Redux tool extension. If, for example, you installed extension, but here, instead of this thing that you see now here, you see some label like cannot find a state, this means that you did something wrong in these lines. So basically, if I will just remove this code and reload the page, then you see no store found, and make sure to follow instructions, which means basically the one thing is to install extension and the second thing is to configure store devtools module. So now we successfully installed NgRx store devtools, which means we can see our state, actions and so on. Basically, let's talk a little bit about these devtools. What is this and how we can use it? So the main point is here on the left, and this is our actions. So here we have one action, NgRx store init. This action is fired automatically when we start an application and we have NgRx store. Basically, here on the right there are three tabs: action, state and diff. Basically, when we click action, we see information regarding the action which is active on the left. So in this case, this action is active, and as you remember, we have inside action for sure type. In this case, we don't have additional data, but just type, where we have a string store NgRx init. We also have here a state, and this part is saying regarding what state do we have. As you can see, it's completely empty because we didn't create any state yet. We will create it later. For now, this is empty. And diff is the difference between the state and the state after changes with the action. Basically, this means that we have a state like some big object with some properties, and then some action is fired, and we change our state to show the changes for user, and in diff we can see the difference between the old state and the new state. Now let's check what we did with our action. So basically here is our sign up, and here we can write something in all fields and click sign up. And bam, as you can see on the left, we have new action with Auth register. And this is exactly the action that we created by ourselves in previous lesson. And when we click on action, we see a lot of information. So let's make it bigger. It doesn't work. So basically, as you can see here, in the tree, there are all properties which we have in this action. Of course, there is a property type. Without this property, action cannot exist. So type is always there. This is the name of our action, and this is actually from enum. And then we have three additional properties: password, email and username. And these all are fields from our form. And this is exactly here when we in register pass this information from this form value inside our action. And now we can jump to action. This is action type register is the name, and here are props that we throw inside our action. Basically, as you can see now, our component doesn't know anything about registration or state or whatever. It can just dispatch action, nothing more. So basically, we don't have in our component services or some subscriptions or some fetch logic. We just dispatch actions to communicate with our state. Basically, in this case, our components are completely pure, and they just communicate with state with this store dispatch. So as you can see, we successfully started to use NgRx. We created our own action, we dispatched this action, and we installed Redux DevTools to see information about our action and our state. And in the next lesson, we will start with creating our state. In this video, I wanted to start with creating state, but we are missing quite a lot of interfaces for our authentication to make things more understandable. Basically, we are using TypeScript with Angular, and of course we want to type everything and never use any. And I saw a lot of projects where people were not aware that they need to invest a lot of time and effort in writing types and interfaces to structure their application. And this is even more important than to write code, because if you write some constants or things or properties in this and you just say that this is any type, then nobody after and you can't first of all use the power of TypeScript to see compiling errors, and secondly it's really not understandable what it is about. Basically here you can, for example, see we have const routes and we are in Auth module. I can just click here to see the hover effect. Here is the example about what is routes. So we understand, okay, there is a path string and the component which is type of register component, which means we for sure know what routes is. We could also type it strictly here and write some interface, like full interface, if we need. And I prefer to always write interface because it brings clarification for people who are seeing this code and they don't need to hover and check what is it inside. That's why let's create several interfaces for our current user and our register interfaces, because we need to use them later and it will bring us more clarification. So let's check this example, Angular Real World IO. We're on register page, and first thing which is interested for us, what happened when we are registering. So here we just register a user, we click sign up. And here, as you can see in console, there is a request in API users, post request, and then we get in preview our user. Basically, this is the information of current user. Now, as you can see, I'm logged in, and now let's reload the page. And as you can see on reload, there was a request. In this case, it was get request, because obviously we are registered and we are logged in. So basically, on every reload, we are making an API call for getting our current user to know if we are correctly logged in and if we have power to do something in this system. And basically, as you can see, the response is exactly the same like it was on register, which means this is the information of current user. And basically here we can see it only in the network. So basically, when person opens our application, he doesn't know how current user is looking like. That's why we want to create an interface for current user. At the beginning, of course, we need it only inside Auth component, but basically you can imagine that almost every module will need current user. Let's say here on the top, there is a top bar module here, we will implement it later, and here you can see information about current user, at least username, which means this component will also use information about current user. Which means actually we can create this type for current user not inside Auth module but in shared folder. We will create it in a second because we will use this interface in a lot of places. So basically here what we need to do in our app, inside we just create a folder which is called shared. And as we already talked in file structure, here we can just create new folder which is called types, and here we will create all our types. In our case, we want to create current user.interface.ts. And just to remind you, this is an entity interface, that's why we're writing the name of the entity in the file. So now let's write export interface. And this is current user interface. And once again, a lot of people are writing interfaces just like this, so just current user. And then in code, it's not that clear when you can see current user interface, because in this case, you know for sure, okay, this is interface. Inside this interface, we want to just write all properties that we see inside API response. So basically we can just go here, check the network, and copy all properties from here in our interface. And then every person who will come in our application will know how current user should look like. So basically here we have ID, and this is a number, and then we have email, this is string, and we have created at when user was created and updated at. It is actually doesn't matter if we use these properties on frontend or not. We just specify how current user is looking like. And basically it should look for sure the same like an API. Then we have much less collisions and problems while speaking with API. So here we also have username, and username is also string, and we have biography. And biography can be there, but it's not mandatory. That's why we're writing string or null. And this is one more important point to know. Of course, we could write like this. This is a string, and we say that this string is not mandatory. And we are saying, okay, biography can be undefined. But as you know, in JavaScript, it's not only nil, it's undefined and null, which are two different things, and I prefer to stick to the one of them. And I prefer to use null everywhere. That's why I almost never are writing these optional types. I'm writing like this. It is biography with string or null. Basically, you can do another approach, but at least I know that in all my applications I don't have undefineds, but I have only nulls or some type. So basically biography can be string or null, and we also have image. It can also be string or null, and then we have token, and this token is string. And let's check. We have all fields here, and I just created a current user interface. Now every person just come in our project, open this interface and know what is it about. The other interface that I want to create, you can see here in our Auth store actions that we just in props wrote this object. And this is all good, but this object we can't reuse at all. And basically when person look at these props, he doesn't understand what is it about. Basically, when you need to write more than two props, it makes sense to create an interface. But of course, it should be a logical interface and not just some random. So this interface is of course about registering, and actually this is a request. So basically this is the data that we are giving in API to register user. Basically, when we give some information, we are saying that this is the request, and when we get some information, we get a response. That's why we name these things the same. And as you can understand, this register action belongs to authentication module, and maybe later we will use it in other places, but for now it's only here. That's why we will create here a folder types, and we will put here new type and name it register request interface ts. And now let's write interface for it. And basically now every person which will see this interface will understand what information we need to give in API to make it working. And basically here we can check once again. So I'm in this example project, and if we click in settings, we can log out here on the bottom. So I'm now logged out. Now I click on sign up. I just fill everything, and email should be valid. Now I click sign up, and here we have some error. Email is already taken. Once again. So we register the user, and here you can see the request. The request is a user object with fields inside: email, password, and username. That's why we just write user, and here email, string, and then password, also string, and here username, string. Now our interface is ready, and we can use it inside our action. So basically here, instead of all this stuff, we can just use our interface. And we can say that this is the request. So let's delete everything here and write request. And this is our register request interface. And we just import it here. And now it's much more clearer what is it about. So basically here action type register, and here props request, and we see register request interface. Actually interface should be with big E, and we need to change it here and inside the file. So basically here should be big E, and then it is working correctly. So here we have interface. We already created several of them for our authentication, and we will create even more. And you need to understand that it's really important not only in Angular world, but when you use TypeScript to think in interfaces and to build architecture from interfaces. In this video, we will continue to work with NgRx and we will talk about reducers. So basically, what do we need reducers for and what is the state? So here inside Redux devtools, you can see that we have a state. Now it is empty, and of course we want to store something in our state. So let's basically talk about register page. We can say that our application consists from different pages, and we want for some pages to store some information in our state. Then we can reuse this information from any place. We can see it in our devtools, and it is quite convenient and straightforward to work with it. So let's start with sample simple. We already dispatched our action register, and we can see it in our Redux tab here. So here is our action register, and now we want to create a reducer, and reducer is a part of our state. Basically, we can register reducer inside module. For example, in our case, we have module Auth. We want to register here new reducer, and then we will have access to the part of the state. You will see how it works in a second. Basically, for sure, in this page, we will submit in something, like our form. And when we are submitting it, we want at least to disable this button. So basically, we can store in reducer a property like isSubmitting, which will be true when we are submitting something or false when we are not. And then we can use this property to react in this component. So first of all, of course, we start with interface. Basically, we want to create an interface for the state of our authentication component. So basically here in our auth types, we can create new file and call it auth state interface. So basically here is also naming convention. Normally we have pro module 1 interface for state. Of course we can have more if the module is too big, but almost always it will be one interface with one reducer. So in our case it's auth state, so we name everything with word state. And here we export our interface, and this is auth state interface. Now the question is, what do we have inside? As we discussed, for now we have only one property, so it will be isSubmitting, and it can be true or false, so it's Boolean. Now our state is finished. Of course, later we will create here additional properties, but at least we can use this interface and create now reducer. So we are creating everything related to NgRx inside store. So here we have here actions, action types, and now we create new file, which is called reducers.ts. So first thing for our reducer is to create initial state, which means the state that our application will have at the beginning of the initializing of our application. So basically here is just an object initial state, and here exactly in this place we want to use our state interface. So this is auth state interface, and this is an object, And as you can see here, we already get a message that we need here property is submitting, which is really nice because we can directly see if all properties are implemented. So here we are saying that is submitting by default is false, and now interface is now correct. As you can see, also I have imports in my editor directly with a relative path. I am trying to avoid relative path always and use absolute path because it just helps for understanding application and copy pasting links easier. So we have here a source, then app, we're in Auth, and here are types. So this path is correct. And now we created initial state, and now it's time to create our reducer. Basically here, everything what I am discussing now is in documentation. So here in NgRx store, there is an architecture, and here is the point reducer, and here you can copy paste some code about how to create reducers. So basically here, it's time to create our reducer function. And reducer function is the function which will change our state somehow. And to create a reducer, there is a special helper from NgRx, which is called create reducer. And inside we need first to give initial state, and then we are giving arguments with on helper, where we throw our action and how this action will change the state. Let's see it in action. So initial state is clear. This is our initial state for this reducer. Now we say here on, and on is a special thing from NgRx store. And as you can see here, there are two parameters. The first one is creator. Basically, creator means the action. So on what action do we want to react? And we have now only one action, register. So here we can say on, and here is register action. And as you can see, my action is auto imported. Now we have a reducer. And here we get as an argument, you can see here highlight in my editor, this is a special function on reducer, and we get here as a first argument state. In our case it's auth state interface, and then an action. And you can see that inside an action here there is a request. Basically this request register request interface was specified in previous lecture. That's why here we can simply say that we know that this is state, this is what we want to modify. And this function should give us back also auth state interface. Now we can do something inside this function. So here we want, this is state that you can see here, this state is our old state. So basically this is state that we have here at the beginning. So here we can write then state. So we are spreading the old state, and spreading means that we just take all properties from the old state and we are merging it with is submitting true. Let's save this. So here is an error. I put here round bracket. We don't need it here. And as you can see now, we don't have any errors. Let's make it a little bit more clear and pretty. So here is initial state, and then here will be on. And let's save this. And actually, one more bracket is expected. This is from on, and then this is from create reducer. So I save this. Now Prettier can prettify it. So basically, once again, this is create reducer to create a reducer. As the first argument, we have initial state. As a second argument, there is an on function, and this function comes from ngStore, and we say on, which means basically when this action happens, when this register action happens, and we import it from the actions, then we do this function, these three lines. And in this function, we get as a first parameter the state that we created. So basically current state of our reducer. And now here we're saying, okay, this is state, this is our state interface. And of course we want to get the same state back, and we modify it somehow. And you can ask me why I'm writing here this interface. what I return back. Basically, we could of course just remove it and then it will be looking better. But the problem is when I write here foo equals 1, I don't get any mistakes. Because here basically we don't say what state, what interface do we want to get back. And basically if I will try with such approach, writing like foo equals 1, and then save it, as you can see we have an error, because here we say that we want back auth state interface, but we gave a foo 1 which does not exist. Now we already created auth reducer and we even used our actions. I also want to fix my path to absolute path, so it will be like this. Here will be source auth and then store and actions. And I also want to move it on the first line, so we separate our third-party imports and our imports. And now we need to import correctly this auth reducer. Basically the problem is that we can't just write here export const and then reducer, because it will work in just-in-time compilation, which means in dev process, but it won't work in our tab build. So basically when we're building Angular, this is ahead of time compilation and it is quite tricky, and we need to prepare sometimes our code to be working in production. So basically in this case, for ahead of time compilation, we need to export here not with const but export function, and we name it for example reducers. And here we know that we get state, and this is our auth state interface, and we get an action. And basically action is an action from NgRx. So I am importing it here from NgRx, and inside we want to return our auth reducer that we created and give inside state and action. Basically this code is almost always like this. So we create function reducers, here we return our reducer with state and action, and state is our state of reducer and action is what we change in our state. And then we write some on functions here. Basically we can write like a lot of functions on one by one here, and we specify how do we change our state. Basically in this case it's clear, when register action happens, we update is submitting to true. Now the only question is how can we use this reducer. Basically we need to register it correctly. First of all, I want to change one small mistake. In here, in app module, we wrote here store module for root and empty array, which is not bad and it will work actually, but for the point of correctness, here is an empty object. Basically in for root of store module, we are given an object and not an array. Now let's jump back in our auth, in auth module. And basically in the module we want to register our reducer. And you can ask why here, because this is the same approach like with routes. When we just destroy this auth module, we want to destroy everything, like all NgRx actions, reducers, and so on. So basically if we will register these actions not in this auth module but outside, then it's much more difficult to clean the project. To register our reducer, we need to write here in imports store module, and this is imported from NgRx store dot for feature. Basically this is the feature that we register, and the first argument is feature name. In our case this is auth, so basically normally we use the name of the module and then reducers. And this reducers property we can import now here, and here is autocomplete from source, so it should look like this. Store module for feature, auth, and reducers. And these reducers are imported from source app auth store reducers. And of course I want to move import of store module on the top to make it clear. So basically this line imports our reducers with the name auth inside the state tree. And now let's check we don't have any errors here in web server. So basically maybe we successfully implemented a reducer. So as you can see here, we click on state and now it's not empty anymore, it's Auth property. So basically with this line for feature, when this module is loaded, we put Auth property inside our state. And as you can see here, there is submitting false. And now let's try to click sign up button. As you can see, there is Auth register, and now our state is submitting true, which means with this action we changed our state. And which is of course good, we always see all properties from the state everywhere, and it's super easy to understand what action changes your state. So it's not like you have some magic properties in this inside each component and you need to debug it with console log. You just go here in Redux DevTools and you just click, okay, what changed my state is submitting, and you just click on the actions, and then at some point you click on the action and you see, okay, my action is register changed is submitting to true. And what is even more better, you can click here on diff and then you see here the difference in state. Basically the whole state tree here will be shown with differences. So in this case we see that property is submitting was changed from false to true, which is really convenient for debugging. So basically, once again, what is happening? So here we first register reducers to create our state. In our case, we registered reducer Auth and we described somehow how our reducer will react on actions. In this case, we wrote only one case for register action, and we are saying that here we change our state and we get here only the part of the state, this Auth property, and how we change is submitting property. Basically then in our component here, like we did previously, here we have onSubmit method, and here is this store dispatch register actions where we give some properties. Basically we just see here the action that we dispatched, we can debug it, we see what properties are here, and we see how this action changes our state. So we successfully created a reducer. In previous video we already created a reducer and we already dispatched some information from our component. Now it's time to somehow get data from our reducer in our register component. Basically it would be nice to have in our component this is submitting property to show on the button, on this submit button, when we submitting the request to the backend and for example disable this button. So let's check how we can do it. For this, in NgRx, a special term is called Selectors. And basically Selectors is a function which help us to create or get a part of our state. And let's check how it is working. So inside store, we want to create new file which is called selectors.ts. And first of all, we want to create here feature selectors. If you remember here in Auth module, we registered here our reducers with a special function called forFeature. And basically this is the idea. Each property, when we register a reducer, is a feature. That's why here we can say that first of all we want to somehow get this Auth feature selector. And let's check how it will look like. So basically here we need to have Auth feature selector, and with the help of this function we will get this property from our state. So basically here we have create feature selector, and this is a special function which is coming from NgRx store, and here you have a name, for example Auth. Now here, as you can see, we created Auth feature selector, and this is special memoize selector, and you see object unknown, default projector function unknown. Basically, it's too much unknown and we want to know about what we're writing. So basically here in create feature selector would be nice to specify what interface this Auth feature selector is giving us and what is our global state. So first of all, we want to create global state. Basically, global state means all properties that we have here inside our state. So basically then each developer can just go to code and see what global state is here for us. And as this state is global and we will use it actually in every selector in every module, we want to create it in our shared folder. So we have here types and we can create here app state.interface.ts. So basically this is the whole state of our Redux and people can see it directly here. So this is app state interface and we already know that we have inside Auth and Auth is Auth state interface. Export const, not export const, but export interface of course. And now we want to import Auth state interface from source app auth types auth state interface. Basically, this is what we created with isSubmitting. And here we know, okay, we just click here, we know that app state is auth with this isSubmitting property inside. Now we already created app state and we can continue creating our feature selector. Basically here everything is working, but of course you can provide in this create feature selector some types. Types by default, as you can see, unknown, and this is not what we want. So basically here we can provide a generic with two arguments. And the first one will be our global state, so app state interface, and the second will be the state of Auth, so it will be Auth state interface. So once again, we are talking here about TypeScript. So here there is a function create feature selector and we can jump here to definition. Maybe it can be a little bit complicated for you, but the idea is that here you can see create feature selector and here we can give two things. And the first thing is t, and t actually it's our global state and v it's the part of the state that we want to get. Basically here we specify create feature selector, app state is our global state and auth state is what we are getting here inside auth. Now if we inspect this auth feature selector, you can see that this is now not unknown and there is no just object here, but it's a memoized selector from app state, auth state, and we have a default projector function for auth state. So basically these things help people and TypeScript to understand what are we writing at all. So basically this is actually one of the problems that I see in Angular. There are too many things that a person needs to know to write good Angular code. It's for example also Angular and you need to know TypeScript and you also need to understand NgRx for example, so this means Redux. And you need to know such things from TypeScript as generics, and then you need to know RxJS to write streams because the whole Angular is built on streams, and so on and so on. So basically it's quite a lot to learn, but in this course we will cover a lot of things and you will understand the most parts of it. So basically here we created our feature selector to select this feature. But this is just a helper function and we can't just directly use it. We created here it to create all other selectors for the properties inside this auth function, auth property, sorry. So now here we want to create a new function with export const and here we name it isSubmitting. So this is exactly function to get this isSubmitting property. So here is isSubmitting and of course as always we prefix everything with the entities. and we're writing selectors here, so it will be isSubmitting selector. And now we're using a special function which is called not create feature selector but create selector. So here it is also from RxJS NgRx store. And here as a first parameter, we are giving our Auth feature selector, what we created previously. And as a second parameter, we give a function how we will get the needed property. So inside this function, as you can see, the argument is Auth state, and this is Auth state interface. And now we want to return Auth state.isSubmitting. Basically, this is how it looks like. So this is a special function that we can use later in component to get isSubmitting property, like in every place where we want, from this Auth feature selector. And basically we can just copy this function and write function for some other property and we can also have some difficult logic here, but the basic example how to get property is like this. So basically we're creating selector with create selector, and here we throw our feature selector, and then we write a function here how we get something from this state part. And one more thing that maybe you are curious about. As you can see, I am always writing interfaces, even if they are not needed. So basically here we can just remove the interface and leave it like this, and it will work. And basically here we can inspect an interface, and you can see that TypeScript understands that this is Auth state interface. So basically it actually doesn't make any sense to write here an interface because it doesn't make any effect. TypeScript understands this interface already without this word. And of course the question is why I'm writing interfaces everywhere. Because then it's much more clearer for other developers and for you yourself, what are we talking about. When you have something like this, let's just imagine, you have here Auth state, and then you have something like this, you have several functions which are doing something, and you can't really know, so here you have foo, and then here you have bar, and here you have bars, and here something else, and here something else. Basically you have a bunch of functions which are making some transformations. And actually without inspecting every function here and every argument, you can't say at all what is it about. But basically if we say here that foo is foo interface and bar is bar interface and so on later, we can first of all jump to every definition just directly here, like I can jump to definition here, for example, and see exactly what this definition is about. I am understanding much better what code we're writing at all. That's why I always suggest to not be lazy and always define the types. First of all, sometimes you will see that types are not what you expected. And secondly, you always will understand what is it about. That's why here we're writing that Auth state is Auth state interface. Now our isSubmitting selector is ready and we can use it in our component. Let's jump now back in our component and subscribe to our state. On basically what does it mean subscribing. So here we want to create new property which is called isSubmitting with $ at the end. And basically if you don't know, this $ means that we are talking about streams. And just 2 words about streams, if you don't know what is it, Angular basically is built with the help of RxJS. And RxJS, here I can open the documentation. This is the official site. And introduction here you can read, this is basically a library to work with streams. And basically there are of course pros and cons to work with streams, but with Angular we don't have so much as a choice. Basically we are doing everything with streams, and NgRx library which we are using to work with state basically implement everything with streams. which means we're just doing everything with streams. So here is the property, and dollar means that this is observable. And what is observable? This means that we observe some value. And here is an observable. It comes from RxJS, as you can see here. And of course, we want to move it on the top. And inside observable here, you can see we have an error that generic type observable requires one argument. So here in our generic, we need to provide a value. And basically value means what value do we have inside this observable. And we know that our isSubmitting is Boolean. That's why we just write here that this is Boolean. So basically we created a variable isSubmitting, and we know that it will be an observable. Now the question is how we can create this observable. We already have here this initialize form, and I have also one more naming which I use everywhere, and this is initialize values. So in every component where I need to assign some properties at the beginning, I create the function initialize values. So let's just create it here, and it returns just void. And inside we want to set this isSubmitting. And as you can see here, we just inspect this property, and you see that this is observable of Boolean. Now, what do we assign? We have access to this store, as we already used here for this store dispatch, but in this case we want this store pipe, and why pipe I will say in a second. And inside pipe we want a select, and select comes also from NgRx, and inside select we just need to put our selector that we already created. So isSubmitting selector. I just hit enter, and basically this is it. So with this line, we are subscribing to the part of our state where we're selecting this isSubmitting property. And after this, here we get an observable isSubmitting. And basically, let's just console log what is it about. isSubmitting, and this isSubmitting. And we can see in browser, in console, that isSubmitting dollar is store. And this is actually observable. So here you can see actions observer and so on, and isColor, which means that this is an observer. And when some value is observable, and this is actually a stream, this means that all changes to what we are observing will just come directly in here, and we can read them. So let's check. This is submitting, and let's try to render it. For example, somewhere on the top, let's just put here this variable is submitting. And basically, if we will just render it like normal variable, it won't work. Let's check. So here is on the top, you can see object. And of course it doesn't work because this is an observable, and it doesn't matter that this is Boolean. We need to get a value from observable. And luckily in Angular, there is a special pipe which is called async. So we can write like this, pipe async, and we're using async when we need to get a value from observable. So here, let's reload the page. As you can see that we have here false. And now let's just clean on sign up. And as you can see here, we have true, which means at the moment when we start registering, this property was changed to true, but of course we never changed it back to false because we never implemented register success or register failure. We'll implement it later, but for now you know that we can get with this isSubmitting observable this data directly from store. So basically what you see now on the screen is here from this Redux store, this property from the state Auth is submitting true. So now as you can see we can render it. When we reload the page is false by default, how it should be. When we click our action it's true. Now we can use this property to disable our button. So basically here we want disabled class, and we want to be disabled when is submitting, and don't forget async pipe is true. Basically, this button will be disabled when isSubmitting observable is resolved to true. Let's reload the page, and here we click on sign up, and as you can see, our sign up is disabled because the property in reducer is in true. As you can see, our selectors and our subscriptions here is working, but let's talk once again how does it working. So first of all, we created selectors. First of all, it was feature selector to get this feature Auth from the state, and we will use this Auth feature selector a lot here because we already need other properties like, for example, current user or is loading and so on. And for now we have only isSubmitting, and we are getting it with create selector, where we throw this Auth feature selector and the function with Auth state, and from this Auth state we are getting isSubmitting. After that, we jump to our component and we create a property observable, and we are saying that this is Boolean because obviously isSubmitting is Boolean. And here we subscribe to these changes with this store select and isSubmitting selector. Basically, you can write it without pipe like this, so this store select, and it will be just the same logic, but you should not. And the question is, of course, why? It will work. We can check that it is working. In browser, we reload, we click, and it's working. The problem is with this approach is in RxJS. The old version of RxJS was just a bunch of functions. So basically we could write things like this. So here we have this store select, and here after this we write something like filter, and then it will be filtered from RxJS, and then something else like map, also from RxJS, and it will work. In the newer versions of RxJS it was changed, and now the approach is to have a pipe function like everywhere when you work with observables, and now inside pipe you have a bunch of functions one by one which will modify the stream, which means this is a stream, and then after this we can do something with value. For example, we want to map it, then we use map from RxJS, and then we can access this isSubmitting property and change it somehow. For example, isSubmitting then is Boolean, and we can do something like return string foo. And basically the idea is that we always write pipe, first of all, because sometimes we want to do something after select. So basically select is not enough for us, and we want to do something more. If we won't write pipe, we can't do some other operations afterwards. And secondly, it's the default best practice in RxJS to write everything with pipe. So in this case, this is pipe and then select to select a value, and inside throw in selector. And of course, the most popular mistake that people who just start to work with NgRx are making is that they forget to write here select function, and they write something like this, like pipe and then isSubmitting selector, and it just doesn't work. So basically, don't forget to select a value, we need select and selector. In the previous video, we created reducer and started to working with our state. Now, before we start to work with effects from NgRx, we need to prepare our Auth service. So basically, we have an Auth service here in Auth module, and at least for register, we have an API call to register user. So basically, we already created several interfaces. We have a register request, we created it previously. Basically, this is data that we need to give to API to register a user. And also in shared, we have in types current user. This is already good, but we need to go further. So first, let's start with creating service for Auth module. So basically, as we talked in the lesson about file structure, we put all our services in services folder. Basically, this means that all these services belong in Auth module. So here in services, we create the first service with name Auth service TS. Basically, I always start with this first service and then split it later if the service becomes too big. It doesn't need to be at the beginning like several services with just one function. So basically, for now, we put everything in Auth service, what we need for this module. So here is our service. So we name it like this because this is the same name like the module. And now we need to export class, and this will be our service. And just to remind you, a lot of people, and I also, forget to put here injectable decorator. And if you just forget to put injectable decorator, you will get quite strange messages from Angular, and it's not 100% fast clear what are we doing wrong. So basically always, if we have service, injectable decorator is needed. Now we are in our service and we want to create a function to register our user. Basically, as I already said, all our functions inside services when we're working with the API will be stateless. So basically, this function of register will just take our data that we prepared and give us observable back. So basically, let's check how it will look like. So we have register and we put data inside. And we know that data is register request interface. We already created this interface. This interface, we can jump here inside. This is user and string password username. Now, what do we want back? Obviously, we're registering a user and we will get some response. And let's check in this conduit example of Angular, what do we get in response if we register user. So here I will just log out. Now open the console with network tab. Now I am in sign up and I am registering a user. And as you can see here, we have a request with post, and as a return, we have here an object with user, and here we have all fields of current user. So basically it would be nice to have an additional interface which says what are we getting in return. So basically here we know that this is user and current user, but from our code it's not clear. So basically let's say here that we get current user interface, because basically this is what we want to get. So we register user with some data and back we need a current user. Basically for us this user property is not interesting and we really just want to get current user. And just to remind you, current user is looking like this. This is just a plain object. So now we need to return here HTTP. And to start working with HTTP, we need here to add constructor, and inside constructor, private HTTP, and this is HTTP client. And HTTP client we need to import from another library, HTTP client from Angular, and now it will be common and /HTTP. So it is already there, but my editor doesn't understand this yet. And now we imported HTTP, as you can see. And also I want to move observable on the top. And also I don't like this relative path. So it should be source, app, auth, types, register request. So now here we want to return this HTTP, and we know that it will be post request, and now here we need a URL. Basically here we can specify what URL do we need. And as you can understand here, the URL is like this, HTTP conduit production ready IO, and obviously for every URL we will use this base path. So basically here, for example, you can see we are also fetching tags from the same URL with conduit production ready IO, and at the end we have API tags, which means it doesn't make any sense to copy this URL and put like this here in this function, like here we know, okay, this is API users, because then we will copy this base path in every function. And of course, this doesn't make any sense. So for this, I recommend you to move this URL inside environment variables. So basically, we already talked about it. We have here in source environments, and in this folder we have environments for development and production. And here is production false, and we can just create additional property, for example, API URL, and it will be our string. And we now can copy this string, for example, until slash. So here is our API URL, https conduit production ready IO. We also need to copy it for production environment because it will be the same. Now we have here also API URL, and now we can use this URL not like this, but with environment URL. So basically here it will be URL, and from environment here API URL, we take it and concatenate with /users. In this case, this is used only once, and in each function we can use it like this and not copy-paste this base URL. So now back to our post, we have HTTP post, here goes URL and data. And as you can see here, we have now an error. So basically we are saying in this function that we want to get back observable of current user, and we get back an object. And obviously this is an object because we have here HTTP post, and we didn't provide any type, and post by default thinks that this is an object. So basically we need to fix it. So in this case we need to modify our post. So here we need to know what we are getting back. And for this we need to create new type. So basically let's jump to our types and create new file which will be what we are getting back. So we can name it Auth response interface. And I am saying here auth and not actually register, because the same interface will be when we will be logging in. So basically this is the same interface, and we can take it like this and not copy it twice for register and login. So we already saw here that as a response we have here a user property. So it will be export interface and auth response interface, and inside it will be user, and we know that this is current user interface. So this is our interface. Now we can use it in our service. So here we can say that back we are getting auth response interface. And obviously it helps. Now it's not object, but still we want here to get back current user, which basically is fine, because from all places from our application, of course, when we make register, we just need back a user. We don't need some additional property data, which we then need to additionally handle. So for this, here, as you know, we are getting code like this. So we are getting object with property user, but we want to get rid of this additional property. For this, we can just use map here. And as I said in previous lecture, we can't use directly map, but we are using all from RxJS with pipes, which means here we have pipe, and inside pipe we have a map function. And this map function have as an argument response, for example. Let's name it response, and we know that this is auth response interface. And now here we simply say that this is response.user. So this is the data that we want to get back. And here we just need to import map from RxJS operators. So basically, once again, what is it about? We have here this HTTP post, and we are saying that we are getting back auth response interface, because this is what we are actually getting. The user where inside is current user. This HTTP post gives us back an observable with auth response interface, and we are mapping it with the help of pipe and map inside, and we map response to response user. And as you can see, response user is current user interface. That's why our register function now gives us current user interface back. Our service is completely ready and we successfully created register function. The only thing that we need to do is to inject this Auth service in our module. So here we jump in Auth modules TS, and then inside we need to add providers, and this is an array where inside we register Auth service. So here Auth service comes from services Auth, and I don't want relative path, so it will be source app Auth services Auth service. So here we successfully registered it, and let's try if it's working. So we won't do such approach in real life, but just to test the service for now, we will inject it directly in our component. So once again, we won't do it like in normal project, and we will remove this code in the next lecture, but here I will just inject Auth service from Auth service, and here we can try our register. So instead of dispatch, actually we can make dispatch, that doesn't matter. We just have this Auth service, then register, and they throw inside this form value. So everything seems to work, and let's check if it is compiling. So we don't have any errors here in web server. And now when I reload the page and jump to register, and then we have an error here that HTTP client is not available, and no provider is found for HTTP client. And this happens because we didn't register HTTP client module, but we tried to use HTTP client inside our service. So basically we need to go to app module TS, and here inside imports we can just write HTTP client module, and we just import it like this. So as you can see, this is from Angular Common HTTP. I will move it on the top. And now when we reload the page and jump to register, we don't have any errors. Now let's check if it's working. So we click on sign up. And as you can see here in the network, nothing happens. And this does not work because by default in Angular, any call for HTTP client doesn't make anything if we don't write subscribe here. So basically we can subscribe for the data from observable, and here this code won't work. This is like observable, but we need to subscribe in order for this call to be made. So here we can say that we get back current user, and this is current user interface. And here let's just console log current user and check what we get. So here we reload the page, click on sign up, and as you can see now we have 404 because here post for users does not exist. And this happens because we forget here to write /API. So basically let's jump back to environments, and here we should have at the end /API. And the same we should do for production. So here will be /API. Now let's try once again. We click sign up, the request is there, and as you can see we get an errors. So basically this is fine because all data here are empty, so we just throw them as it is. And here we get an errors that email can't be blank, password can't be blank, and username can't be blank, and so on. Which means our service is working, we can do requests now. Obviously we won't do them directly from our component, so we can remove this code safely. And on the next lecture we will start with effects. So here I remove the call and Auth service from our component. And then we don't need these two imports with Auth service and current user. In previous video, we successfully created a service for our register page. Now it's time to start with effects. Effects is a part from NgRx, and basically the idea is that with actions we can just dispatch something like we did previously. So here we can click, we dispatch an action and we change our state. This is all fine, and this is called synchronous action, which means this is just for frontend. The question is, what should we do when we need to make, for example, API call? In this case, one action is not enough because API call can be quite long, and we want to show one action on the start of API call and another action on the finish of API call. Basically, Effect solves this problem with the help of RxJS. So basically, Effects is heavy RxJS code, and we need to learn how to write them. So let's get started. Here we need to jump in Auth in our service, and let's check first what do we have in Auth types. We already created here 3 types: register, register success, and register failure, which is completely fine. And actually the idea is when we start registering, we dispatch register. Then when the register is successfully finished, we dispatch success. And if our service says, okay, we have an error from backend, then we dispatch failure. And our frontend can react for these changes. Now let's talk about actions. First of all, I thought once again about our actions, and I think it would be better if we create additional folder for actions and split actions. Because, for example, if we will write everything in one file, like all register actions, then all login actions, maybe logout actions, and something again, then it will be quite a big file. So let's move these actions to additional folder. And let's name this then not actions, but we can rename it to maybe register and then action.ts. Basically, as you can see, the same notation as always. This is the action type, that's why it's .action. Now let's create a new folder which is called actions, and we will just move our register action here inside our actions. So we have here action types, reducer selectors, this is fine, and our actions we have here. So this is register action, and we give here register request, and now we need to create success action and failure action. And let's start with success. It will be register success action, create action, and here is our action types dot register success, and the question is, what do we get back? And we already know that our service with register give us back current user. So this is what we want to dispatch. So when we successfully registered a person, we get back current user and we dispatch this data. So here is current user interface. This is fine, and we don't need to forget here round brackets. Let's just save here, and something is not correct. I forget here brackets because in props we give an object. So here it will be current user inside an object, and here we imported our source current user interface. I also separate as always imports, and our action is created. Now we want to create also register failure action. And basically, obviously, you already saw that sometimes we get an errors, for example, when the user is not registered successfully. For example, we didn't provide correct data. So here will be create action, and actually we want here to create an interface for backend errors and so on. But for now, let's skip this step and just say, okay, we failed, but we don't know why. And we will talk about backend errors later when we will implement them. So for now, it will be just action type, register failure, and nothing else, no props. So we just say, okay, we failed. Now our 3 actions are ready, and we can start with effect. And with the same approach like with actions folder, we can create new folder for effects. And here will be our first effect for register. So register.effect.ts. Now, what is a register and register effect at all? This is a service. So basically we start with writing as a service. This is export class and it will be register effect. And we don't write that this is a service because actually we want to treat it as effect. And this is of course injectable. So we should not forget injectable also. And now our effect is almost ready and we just need to create inside the property, and we can just create the property register. Actually this property does not matter how we will name it because it won't be used anywhere and it will just work. And you will see in a second. So here we want to create effect. And as you can see, I don't have any autocomplete because we didn't install library for effects. So if we will open NgRx IO docs, we have here NgRx effects. And this is the part of NgRx, but you need to install it additionally. So here is yarn add NgRx effects. I just throw it in console and install it here. And now we can use create effect, and for this we need to import it. This is create effect from NgRx effects. So create effect is there and we need to provide a function inside. Now the question is, what do we have as a function? And we need here this actions pipe, and inside we throw off type and here will be register action. And I will show you what we are doing in a second. So here, these actions is something that we need to inject in this effect. So these actions come from NgRx, and this is all actions that we have at all. So basically all actions that we dispatch will be in this observable. So basically this is observable from Rx.js. So to inject this, we need here to create constructor, and here we can write private, and it will be actions. So this is an observable, and this is actions. And actions is coming from NgRx effects. So here we successfully injected actions, and now the question is, what does pipe of type do? First of all, we need to inject here of type. Of type comes also from NgRx effects, and obviously we're using pipe to start writing functions inside for actions. And the idea is that we want to subscribe for changes on the specific action. So these actions are all actions that we could trigger. So here what you see, for example, Auth register or NgRx store init or update reducers, these are all actions, and we can have like thousands of actions. And here we say, okay, we want from this stream of actions to subscribe only on type register actions, which means everything that we will write after will happen only on this action. Let's now make it easier to read. So basically Prettier will do it correctly, but for now we don't have enough for one. This is why Prettier makes it in one line, and this is not really readable. So here we have of type, and this is pipe. So basically pipe will go here, and then we have of type inside, and after of type we're having switch map. And basically switch map is what we have in Rx.js to map our stream and to get back another stream. So here is switch map, and we get data from of type register action, and we know that this will be action where inside we have request. That's why we can directly here get request by destructuring, and here with switch map we want to operate with our service. So basically here we write return, and now we need our service. So we need to inject here additionally our service. So this is Auth service and service, and this is Auth service. And now we can use it here. We say return, and this Auth service has inside register that we created previously, and we throw inside request. Now this register request of course can fail or can be successful. That's why we have here pipe, and inside pipe we can have map and catch arrow. So basically if we write here map, we want to map and get back current user, and this current user is current user interface. And after this, so map means successful, we want to return successful action. So here the successful action is register success action, and inside register success action we throw this current user. So once again, what we are doing here, we already get here register action. We know that inside register action, as you can see in props, we have property request, and this request is register request interface, which means the data that we pass inside. For example, in our register function to make an HTTP call. Now here inside switch map, we are calling register from Auth service and we are giving request inside. Then this is an observable, so this is an observable, and with pipe we can write here map to map what we are getting back. And basically we are getting back a current user, this is for sure, because this is what we wrote in the interface, this is the observable with current user, and we want here to dispatch register success action. And we don't write this dispatch by hand like we did in components, and NgRx will do it automatically for us, and we just need to return here our action. So here the action is register success action, and we know that we need to pass inside current user. And this is current user that we get from this service. So this is how it's working, but it's not the end. We also have failure. That's why after map we need a catch arrow. And catch arrow, this is what happens that when request won't successful. So here we have some data, but for now we won't write any code regarding this data because we said that we will make backend errors later. And here we need to return an observable. And to return here an observable, we need to wrap it in Auth. So Auth is from NgRx, and inside Auth you can just throw the data, and this data will be converted to observable. So in our case this is Auth, and here is register failure action, and here we don't pass anything inside because we don't need to. Now the only question is why it is red. So actually I forget to round brackets here and here inside switch map, because basically we are passing inside switch map a function, and this is a function that we are passing inside switch map. So basically here this function ends. And this is one of the points that I don't like about RxJS. It's really easy to make a mistake because we write a lot of brackets, and basically to remember how many brackets you put on the correct line can be sometimes a little bit tricky. So once again, what we did here. So we have an effect, we registered this effect with create effect, we have here the subscription of all our actions with of type register action. We got from this observable only register action, and then we read in the switch map the request from this action, and this is the code of switch map. Inside here, in switch map, we just need to return an observable. So basically here we have this our service register to register the user, and we know that this is a synchronous process, and this is why we have here pipe map and catch arrow. And basically we are coming here when our request is successful, and we are coming in catch error when it's not successful. So here we know that we get current user, and we return our success action with current user. And if we have a catch error, then we return here a failure. Now your question maybe is why we need to write here Auth to wrap our action in observable and here not. And the difference is that here we have this our service register, so this is an observable, and we are running pipe on the observable, which means back we will also get an observable. and here we have a map on observable, and here we are doing some things inside map which are not observable. So for example, we can filter something or map something and so on. So basically inside map we have not observable code, but after running a map function we get an observable back. And inside catch error we just need to return observable, and we don't have here some pipe on the observable. That's why we need here to wrap just our function, our action, with auth. As you can see, it is quite complicated, especially if you don't have a deep knowledge in RxJS, because basically all these things like switch map and observables is a RxJS thingy. But basically this code that you see here, we will copy paste it like for every module. And it won't be that different in most of the cases. Yes, it can have tricky business logic sometimes, but like in 90% of the cases, you will just copy paste this and you will have just different action, different service, different method, and different action on success, on failure. But basically the code actually will stay the same. Now we need to register this effect inside our module. So basically the same logic like with for feature, we want to register an effect only for this module, and this effect will be created only when we register this module. And to register an effect, we write here effects module, and this comes from NgRx effects, and then dot for feature, so exactly the same like always, and inside we are providing an array of effects. And our first effect will be register effect, which is coming from source, auth store, effects, and register effect. So basically with this line we are registering all our effects. Now let's just move RxJS effects on the top and check if we have any errors. And yes, we have, because we moved our actions from register from actions to additional file, and now Auth store actions does not exist. So we need to jump inside our component and here on the top fix this, and now it's not store but store actions and register action. So we fixed one place, and there is another in reducers. Let's jump in our reducers, and here we also don't have store actions but actions register action. As you can see, in our web server now we don't have any errors, but when we jump in our page we get an error that we didn't register effects in the root. And basically this is the same story like with for feature. We need to register effects root module in order to be working with effects. So for this we need to jump in app module ts, and here we registered already a store module for root and then devtools, and here we also can register our effects module. So it is effects module, and we simply write for root, and inside it will be empty array. So this means that we will just register all effects inside every module, and we don't have what to do inside our app module. Now, as you can see, when we reload the page, we don't have any errors. And now the moment of truth, we're in Redux tab. Here I will make it bigger. And now we just simply click sign up. And as you can see now, there was not only one action register, but also action register failure. And in the network, you can see that we tried to make a request with API users, and obviously it was bad request because we didn't provide any data, it was empty, and this is all just blank. And the problem here is that we don't give our data correctly. So as you can see here, we have auth register action, and here we have type and just 3 properties. And this is of course not correct, and let's check what we are trying to achieve. So here we have our components register, and here we dispatch is in on submit register action. What's the problem? We have here in Redux an error, and an error says that we don't get correct properties when we pass here register, because all our properties should be in request, but we just throw them in the root. And the problem is that we don't get any TypeScript error. And obviously we don't want to have any runtime errors or errors related to business logic that we can handle with TypeScript. And here our problem is that when we inspect this form value, here you can see that property abstract control.value is any, which means this is not what we want. And there are several approaches to do this, but basically the easiest approach here, we know that in request we should get register request interface. And basically register request interface, let's check what is it. Register request interface is user with email, password and username. So here we can say, okay, here is our request, and we know that inside should be user with inside these three properties, so this form value. And now here we can say, okay, this request is register request interface. And now we need to import it, of course. And now this request here is valid because request says that this is register request interface and not just some not correct data. Because basically in this case here, the problem is that we don't have an error from TypeScript because value is any. If here we pass some not correct value and not any, like string for example, we get an error that argument of type string is not assignable to the type request register interface. So basically here, what we want to give inside is an object with property request. And now it is valid because inside request we are given register request interface, which is the correct thing. That's why you should always be really careful, because from some parts of your code, or not your code but libraries, you can get any, and then at that moment you won't get any error because you can pass any anywhere in any function and you won't get any error message. So let's check if it's working now. When we reload the page and here we click sign up, now let's check what we are given. So this is register, this is type and request, and here is user with 3 values, which should be correct. And of course we get register failure because here we didn't provide any information, but here we see that our request is correct. We have an object with property user and 3 fields inside. Now let's try to register user with correct data. So just throw something valid data inside and click sign up. We can't do this because we disabled a button inside reducer after sign in. We need to fix it later, but for now we can just reload the page. And here our user, our email and password, we click register, and as you can see we don't get any error. Here post was successful, we get back our current user, and here in Redux you can see that we have register and register success. So here there is a request, and inside register success we have a type and current user as expected, and this is the data that we get after registration, and we can use this data inside reducer to use current user and to show that we are logged in successfully. In previous video, we already created an effect for our reducers, and now we need to change this data in our state after success and failure. But first, we need to create additional interface for the backend errors. As you can see here in our example where we check everything, when we register user and we don't give really correct data here, we get here backend errors like email is invalid and password is too short. And here, as you can see in preview, this is how our errors look like. And we want to have an interface for TypeScript because basically all over our application, we will get errors from backend and they will be always in such format. That's why it makes sense to add additional shareable interface for backend errors and use it everywhere. So let's jump back in our application and we can go to app shared types and create here a new file and call it backend errors interface.ts. As you can see, I have here backend errors interface and not backend error interface. We could create that, but it doesn't make that much sense because we always use this interface for all errors and we don't benefit if we create the interface for just one error. So that's why export interface, and here is backend errors interface. And what do we have inside? As you can see here, we have errors is an object with keys, and these keys are our fields, and as a value we have an array of strings. So here, when we say that this is keys, which are strings, we can say key is string, and value is array of strings. So basically this is our simple backend errors interface. Now we can jump back in our actions in Auth, store, actions, and here we said previously that our register failure actions does not have any props. And now we can add these props using our backend errors interface. So here, inside create action, as a second parameter we add props, and inside it we say, okay, in props we have an object, obviously, and we have errors, which is backend errors interface. And don't forget, round brackets afterwards, so this is how it looks like. So we already imported backend error interface, and now here we create 3 actions, and we need to change our state accordingly in our reducer. So let's jump to our reducer. Now we have only one field is submitting. We need to have more, and we need to cover these 2 additional actions here. So first of all, we need to improve our Auth state interface. So here I am jumping to the interface. It is located in types Auth state. So we are inside app Auth types Auth state. And here we need another properties and not only is submitting. First of all, we will get current user. We already did that, but we didn't save the current user data. So we want here to save them, and here we're saying that this is current user interface or null. And you can ask why null, because by default we need to have an initial state. You can see it here. Our initial state is submitting false, and we also now need initial state for current user. And obviously we don't have at the beginning current user. We need in any case to fetch current user. That's why it is null, and after fetch this is current user. What else do we need? Of course, we want to know if user is logged in or not. So that's why is logged in property would be nice to have. It is boolean order null. And here I'm making it null also for such reason. So basically, if the value inside our reducer is null, that means that we didn't fetch information about current user. If we fetched information, it can be either true or false. In this case, we have is logged in, which can be in 3 states. Null means that we don't know yet, and true or false means that we are logged in or not logged in. And last but not least, we have our validation errors, and this is exactly our backend errors interface or null. So basically, if we don't have any errors, and here is validation errors, then by default it will be null, and if we get any errors, it will be backend errors interface. Now let's jump back to our reducer, and here we need to change our initial state. So here, as you can see already, we have some properties and error from TypeScript, and TypeScript says, okay, you should fulfill your interface for Auth state interface. So we're missing current user, is logged in, and validation errors. So basically here we have current user and it is null. We have validation errors, it's also null, and we have is logged in, also null. So our initial state is ready, and now we need to create and update our actions. So basically the first action is our register action, and here we're changing only is submitting. I would also recommend to change validation errors to null, just because when you click here once, you feel here validation errors. And then when you click once again, you want to remove these validation errors. That's why when we start register actions, we want to set validation errors to null. So our register action is covered, and now we want to add one more on, and in this case it will be register success action. And here on success, we need to have access to state and action. Basically, state is our current state, action is the action, register success action with props inside. And we are saying that we want our state interface back. And here we want to merge state also. So here is state. And what do we want to do on success? So first of all, we want to change is submitting to false, because we know we are not in submitting phase. Also, is logged in will be true, because we know that we logged in a user, and we want to set current user. And current user we want to read from action.current user. And as you see, autocomplete works fine, and here we understand that this is current user interface and it comes as a parameter from our action. The next case will be on failure. So here we have register failure action, and the second parameter would be state and action. And here we want also to return Auth state interface, and it will be an object, and we want to spread state, and we want to override here is submitting also to false, and we want here to set validation errors, because basically if failure happens, this means we have some errors. And here we will set errors from action.errors. So this is what we set if we have any errors. Now we need to a little bit update our effect, because here in effect previously, as you can see here, it is red because our failure now expects error messages, and previously we just said that we won't use our errors at the beginning, but now we of course want to read them from our response and set them inside our reducer. So here we're in catch error, which means that as an argument we have here error response, and this is error response from our backend. So this is HTTP error response, and as you can see, HTTP error response comes from Angular HTTP. So here it's on the top, and we have here error response, and we can simply throw inside as a parameter errors. This is error response dot, and here we even have autocomplete error dot errors. So this is errors, as you can see here, it is any, because basically we don't specify in any case what HTTP error response is giving us. And this is actually fine, because we know that here from the backend we get errors as a property, and everything that we see here as a body will be inside error. So basically errors is fine for us, and we throw it in our register failure action. Now let's check what did we do. So here, hopefully it is compiled successfully. Let's reload the page. We don't have any runtime issues. And now let's click on sign up. And let's check our Redux. And you can also see that something is already working. Previously, our button after submitting was staying disabled because we didn't revert is submitting. Now it's green back, which means is submitting is already working. Now let's check what we are doing. We have here register, and in div we can see that we change is submitting from false to true, but we don't see changes regarding our validation errors because they are staying null. And then we have register failure. And here it's more interesting. We set is submitting back from true to false, and we set validation errors. Now in our state, we can see what we have. And as you can see, we have auth, validation errors, and email, password, and username. So basically now we can read these validation errors from the state and render them on the screen. Let's check what will happen if we register user successfully. So here some valid data and valid email and valid password. Now we have register success, and as you can see, is submitting is false, is logged in is true, and current user is set, which means everything is fine, and we can use now current user data. In previous video, we already saved our validation errors to Reducer, which means we can render them on the page. We already said we need the same interface in different pages with backend message errors, but also we need in different pages this validation message component. So basically it would make sense to create this component in shareable because we will render it on different pages. But first of all, let's start with selector. Basically here we have in our selector only is submitting, and we also want to get validation errors in our component. So basically with the same approach like we did previously, we can write here validation errors selector, and this is create selector where we throw inside auth feature selector, and now we have here auth state, which is auth state interface, and we want to get back auth state.validation errors. This is it. Basically, we just copy paste the same with different name. Now our selector is ready, and we can use it inside our register component. So here I am in register component TS, and we have here observable for is submitting. We just need additional observable for our validation errors. So let's name it backend errors, so it's clear. And this is observable for backend errors interface, and this is null. So as we already discussed, in store, backend errors by default is null. This is why here we don't say that this is observable of backend errors interface. It can also be null by default, and we don't want to lie to TypeScript about values. Now here we are in initialize values, and we need to do the same. So here is backend errors with $, and here we write this store pipe. Inside pipe there is a select, and inside will be validation errors selector. So I already auto imported it. Here we have validation errors. So basically our backend errors property is ready, and we can use this property inside our component. So let's jump to HTML. And here you see backend errors are here, and basically here we want to render our shareable component for backend errors that we will create in a second. And as we already discussed, we prefix this component with MC, which means medium clone, and then backend error messages. So basically I think this is fine name for our component, and here we close it with backend error message or messages. I think messages is better. So here is backend error messages. Now we want to render this component. Actually, we don't need this text here anymore. We want to render this component only when we have backend errors, which means here we can write ngIf, and we have here backend errors with $, which is observable, and we can say here async. And basically this code means that this component will be rendered only when backend errors with observable is resolved and not null. Also, we want somehow to pass these backend errors to this shareable component, because in every different place we will render different texts and we want to pass them inside. So here we have, for example, backend errors property, and here we want to throw the same backend errors with a sync. So basically this would be exactly our backend errors interface, and now we already used this component, but we need to implement it in shared. So let's jump to shared. Here we are in shared and we have here only types. As we already discussed, every component which is shareable we will put inside module. Then we need just to inject the module and everything will work. So here we need new folder which is called modules, and inside we will create a folder with name backend error messages. And this is exactly the component that we want to create. Inside it we need a module, so backend error messages.module.ts, and here as always export class, and here we will have backend error messages module, and we of course want here ng module declaration. So here inside we need to import, and here at least we need a common module from Angular and maybe something else later. For now we don't need anything. Also, we need to create a component. So here we create components folder as always, and inside it we create new folder which we can name backend error messages. So basically we name this component the same like we named our module, and we are doing it over and over again, because it doesn't make sense to name the component, which will be actually our root component for this module, with any other name. So here inside we need three files: backend error messages.component.ts, then backend error messages.component.html, and actually we won't need SCSS, but I will create it in any case, just for the sake of that all our components look the same. And now we are in TS. So what do we need here? We need to register a component. So here we need component, and inside it will be selector, and as a selector we already said it's MC backend error messages. And we also want here template URL, and our template URL will be backend error messages component HTML, and style URLs will be an array with backend error messages as CSS. Now we need export class with backend error messages, backend error messages component, and our empty component is ready. So first of all, we should not forget to register it in our module. So here we need declarations, and inside will be our backend error messages component. And we also need here exports, and just to remind you, why do we need exports? In Angular, if we want to use some component outside in other modules, we need to export this component. And of course we want to do this with this component, that's why I add this component in exports declaration. So now our component is ready and we can start to create it. So as we already mentioned, we want to give inside as an input the property backend errors. And now I need to discuss something with you. Just to remind you, for components we use inputs and outputs to describe how this component will work outside in parents. And normally you can see in all guides that people are writing like this. So here you have an input, and then you have backend error messages, or actually we say that this is backend errors property, and the type is backend errors interface. which is fine, and it is written like this in all projects, and basically I'm not using it like this. And why it is like that? Let's imagine that we have here some foo method where we use this and then backend errors. And let's also assume that here we have some property which is called bar, and this is string. And let's assume that we also use here this foo or this bar. So basically we're using in foo two different properties, and here one of this property is an input and another of this property is the property of the component. And we can't distinguish at all components properties and component inputs. And of course, I would like to distinguish it. And for example, if we compare Angular with React, in React you can easily understand when you get properties like inputs and when you work with properties inside the component. And from my experience of making a big project, it really makes a difference if you know if it's input or not. Because basically inputs you won't modify and you will treat them actually like read-only properties, and this is what I recommend you to do. And with this bar you can do whatever, because this is just a property inside the component. So the question is, what do we want to do? And actually in Angular it is possible to create an input with alias. And I don't know for what reason, but they say that this is not the good approach. And in LinkedIn, for some Angular packages, not Angular itself, you can see that they don't recommend to use aliases. I use aliases in a lot of projects in quite big teams, and it works really well. So the idea is that here we're writing backend errors, and here this string is how we are saying that this component should work in parent. So basically in parent we passed these backend errors inside backend errors input, and this is exactly this string. And here this word after these round brackets is an alias. This is how we want to use and assign it inside this. So basically here I prefer to write after the variable itself always word props. And now here we have this backend error props and this bar, and you can directly see the difference, and you can understand that the word that ends with props will be the input, and the word that don't is just the local variable. I think that this is really important approach, but if you don't like it, of course you can just write everything as in all guides without word props, and nothing can stop you. So here we passed the input, we don't need all this code, and now we know that this input is backend errors interface. So we have some keys and we have some strings. And actually we want to render it in such format like here. So basically this is just the concatenation for every key of values, which means here if we just don't pass anything, we can't submit then. But basically the idea is that if you have more than one arrow, like an array, then we will just separate them with comma. So like password is too short and comma password is not correct. Or maybe with empty string will be better. So basically here we need to transform somehow these backend errors to human readable error messages. So let's create here error messages, and this is just an array of strings. So this is just one string, second string, and we want to render them with for each. We can actually already do this inside our template. So here it will be ul with class error messages, and we close here our ul, and inside we want to have li, and for this li we want to have a loop. So it will be ng for loop, and here will be error message of error messages. So just inside here we render error message. So this is like nothing magic, the standard ng for loop from Angular, where we go through array of strings and we just render a string. Actually, this is the whole HTML that we will have for this component. Now, oops, this is CSS. Now we just need to create this error messages property here somehow on initialize of this component. So we need here implements on init, and I will write directly in ng on init because we won't have here any other code except of this, and we need somehow to transform these error messages. And actually it's quite easy. Here we can read all keys and then for each key make a map. So basically object keys will give us back this as array email, password and so on. And we throw inside this, and here is backend errors props, and then we make a map. And here inside the map we have name, string, and each name is just, for example, email or password. And then inside this map we want to get messages. So we want to take this array and concatenate it. So we want to join it. So messages here will be these backend error props. And here is the name, which basically means we take, for example, email, and then we make a join with empty string. Now our messages is ready, and we need to concatenate it with our key. So here will be a name, for example, email, and then it will be messages. So we already created our property, these error messages, and as you can see, we get then back error messages as array of strings. So this is basically our shareable component where we can throw backend errors inside, and we will just transform them and render. So our component is already ready and module also, but here we get an errors. We can see them better inside console here. Actually we can't, okay, but here we get an error that MC backend error messages that we have inside register component HTML is not registered, which means our register component and register module doesn't know anything about this MC backend error messages module. And what we need to do is go in Auth and then Auth module, and here in imports we can just import our backend error messages module. So just like this, all shareable modules we just simply inject in imports, and bam, we don't have any errors. Now let's reload the page and try what will happen. So here we click sign up, we get an errors, and nothing is rendered. Let's just try to start our web server new. Maybe Angular didn't get what files we created. Now let's reload the page and check what happens. So here, as you can see, on sign up, our errors was rendered here. So everything is working. So one small notice, if something is not working for you, even if it's saying that compiled successfully, just try to reload Angular web server, because sometimes Angular can't get what changes we made, especially when we create new files. So once again, how this is working. So first of all, we need to look in Redux tab. We have here register failure. Then in our state appears validation errors. And in our component, in register component, in TS, we have here observable exactly for this property validation errors. So in this observable, we get directly data when we update our state. And then we simply, with the help of this component, which is now shareable, we render these backend errors. And as you can see here, the key is backend errors and not the backend errors props, and only inside components it's with world props. So here all our errors are rendered and we are good to go. We almost finished our register page. We already made a request to our API. We saved the data from the user to our Redux store. And now we only need to save access token to local storage and to redirect user on success login. So let's start with saving the token of user. So basically, what is it about? When we try to log in and basically we register a user here, and it is successfully. So you can see here in the response we have a property which is called token, and actually for us it's just a string, but with this string, if we will store it and make a request, our backend will know the binding between our data, like for example this email and password, with this token. So basically token is a representative of your user, and with this token, when we make a request, our backend knows that we are this user. So basically our goal now is to save this token somewhere, and we will save it in local storage so that we can use it later to read from local storage and add to every request, and then our server knows if we are logged in or not, what user we are, and so on, and if we are allowed to do some request or not. Basically, we can simply open here our store effects and register, and as you can see here, we are doing success. And we could simply write here something that will store our token, like for example window dot local storage dot set item, and for example here it will be access token, and here will be our current user dot token. Basically that's it. This is one line. But I would recommend you another approach. Why is it this approach is not good? It's actually not bad, but here we're using directly window, and basically when you are working with local storage, there is also local storage set and get, and we want to transform a data when we're making set and get. So basically we said it is fine to write it like this, but basically when we're making get, in local storage we can store things only like a string, but basically it would be nice to store an objects also. So for us, window dot local storage dot get item, and if we say here, for example, let's say we saved current user inside, we want this to be an object with ID and so on. So basically we want to stringify things when we use set item, and we want to parse our objects or like any structures when we make get item. Obviously, we don't want to write here like JSON parse, JSON stringify each time when we just need to save or read one property. So we can create additional service like persistent service, which will work with saving to local storage and reading from it. And this is of course shareable service. So in our app shared folder, we can create new folder services and create here persistence.service.ts. And now this is export class persistence service. And we need, of course, to make it injectable. And now inside we will have two methods. First of all is set, and we're setting here a key, for example access token, so the key will be string and the data will be any. And this is the one of small cases where any is allowed, because basically we don't know what type of data we want to save. It can be number, string or an object. That's why data here is fine. And we're returning void because we won't return anything. And here we want a try catch condition. So this is just a plain JavaScript, no magic here. And this is just try catch, and we want to try and make local storage dot set item, and here will be key as the value. We want JSON stringify, and inside we want to throw data. So basically we are running set, which means we want to write in local storage, and we are trying to make set item. And if it will happen, so basically we won't get any error, then we will stringify this data and save it to local storage. If we will fail, so basically we can't stringify or something like that, we want at least to console maybe error, and here will be error saving to local storage, and here will be our error. So our set function is ready. Now we need a get function. Of course, we get just by key, and our result will be also any, because we can after parse it can be a string, a number, or an object, for example. So here the same try catch experience. So in catch we get an error, and in try we try to return, and here will be JSON parse, and here we want to parse local storage get item, and here will be key. So basically, if we can parse a key from the local storage, everything is fine. If not, we want to return null, and it would be nice to say that we couldn't parse it. So console error, and here error getting data from local storage, and this is E. Which means actually if we just get some data and we can't parse it, we return null, so we're on the safe side. And this is it. This is our small persistent service that we can use everywhere and just use set and get to work with local storage, not directly. Now we want to inject this persistent storage in our app Auth component or module and then use it inside our effect. So here we have providers Auth service, and we want to add here persistent service. So basically this is important. We register all services from shared only in modules when we need this. So basically we don't have some global shared module where we register everything and just inject. So we inject only things that we need. Now persistent service is allowed here, and we need to go in our register effects, and here in constructor add it so we can use it. So it's private persistence service, and this is persistent service. Now we have it here, this is imported, and now we want to use it. So here inside a map we can do this persistent service, and here we want to make a set, and let's name it access token, and we will write inside current user dot token. As you can see, we don't have any errors. We don't have errors in our web server, and let's check if it's working. So basically here in local storage, I will delete all my local storage keys, so my local storage is clean. And now let's reload the page and try to register a user. So we click on sign up, and as you can see we get an error, password is too short, which is also good. So our backend validation is working. And now with the second try, here we get a user, and here in local storage you can see that we have access token, and here we saved this string. So basically we get this current user, and we saved with this one string this line in local storage. So now we can everywhere access this access token from local storage through persistent service and use it for our requests. The last thing that we can do with our register page is successful redirect. So basically we want, after success redirect, to redirect user to the home page. And actually effect is a nice place to do this. Why? Because we can subscribe to specific action. So here we subscribe to of type register action, and we can do the same and subscribe to, for example, success action. And let's try this here. So here is the end of our register, and after register we can create new observable redirect after submit. And this will be also create effect, and inside we want here of course a function, and inside this function we want this actions pipe, and inside pipe will be of type, and in this case we want register success action. So basically when success action happens, and here we want not switch map but tab. And you can ask what is tab, And this is the thing from RxJS, obviously. And here in tab, we can write a function. And tab means we just need to do something. So basically, if switch map or map should or must return something, the tab should not return something. It's just a function that will be called after of type, and that's it. So basically, if we just write here console log 1, it means so when register success action happens, we will console log 1. That's it. Of course, we need to do more, and we want to do here redirect. So to make redirect, we need a router access here. So we want to inject router, and let's create a variable router from router. So here is router from Angular router. And now we can use it here and write this router and then navigate by URL. And navigate by URL means that we just throw URL inside and navigate will happen. If we will just call it like this, your page will hang completely. This happens because actually create effect want to dispatch something when we are calling it. For example, here in switch map, we returned some action. And here we didn't, and basically that makes NgRx to hang. And here actually when we use tab, almost always we need to pass as a second parameter. So the first parameter in create is a function here. So this is this function. Now this function ends, and we want here as a second parameter to put some options. And the most popular option is dispatch false, which means that we're saying for NgRx, please don't dispatch anything. And now actually when we're using tab, this means that we are not returning any action and we don't want to dispatch anything. So we just do our thing here and that's it. Now let's check if it's working. So let's reload the page. Here we provide some username, email and password. We click sign up. And as you can see, we are on home page. So basically this create effect was triggered, and after success we were redirected. So basically our register page is fully working. And here in Redux we can see, okay, there was register success, and we were navigated to home page. We also saved this access token to local storage, so we can use it on other pages. And now in state, we see information about current user. So we are good to go, and we can start with creating other pages. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask them and I will answer them for sure. And this was the end of the first chapter. If you want to dive deeper in learning Angular, then check the full course in the description box below.